Story 1.
I always thought the worst thing my mother-in-law could do was rearrange my kitchen cabinets while I was at work. I was so wrong. My name is Cassie. I'm 34, married to a man named Derek, and we have a daughter, Poppy, who had just turned 8 months old when this whole thing detonated. We live about 20 minutes from Derek's parents in Fairfield County, Connecticut. Close enough for his mother, Judith, to drop by unannounced. Which she did, with the regularity of a utility bill and about as much warmth. Judith never liked me. She made that clear from the moment Derek brought me home. I wasn't from the right family. I didn't go to the right schools. My parents ran a dry cleaning business in Bridgeport, and to Judith that was practically a criminal record. She wanted Derek to marry a girl from their country club circle, someone with a hyphenated last name and a trust fund, and the good sense to let Judith run her life. Instead, he married me. And Judith never forgave either of us for it. But what she did last October, that crossed a line I didn't even know existed. It started as most of Judith's schemes did, with a visit she framed as generosity. She came over on a Tuesday afternoon with a casserole I didn't ask for, and spent 2 hours holding Poppy while making pointed comments about how the baby's eyes were so dark compared to Derek's. Derek has blue eyes. Poppy has brown. I have brown eyes. That's how genetics works. But Judith had apparently been doing her own research, the kind you do at 2 a.m. on forums where bitter people validate each other's worst impulses. I didn't know it at the time, but during that visit while I was in the bathroom, Judith took Poppy's pacifier right out of the diaper bag. Just slipped it into a Ziploc she'd brought with her. She'd already ordered one of those home DNA ancestry kits, the kind that also does paternity matching if you add a second sample. She swabbed herself, swabbed the pacifier, and mailed the whole thing off. Her plan, as she later admitted, was simple. She wanted to prove that Poppy wasn't Derek's biological child. She wanted proof that I had cheated, that I had trapped her son, that I was exactly the kind of woman she'd always warned him about. She wanted to hand him the results at Thanksgiving in front of the whole family and watch my life fall apart over cranberry sauce and stuffing. She got results all right. But they didn't say what she expected. The kit confirmed that Poppy was biologically related to Judith. Grandmother and granddaughter, clear match. But there was something else in the results. Something Judith hadn't anticipated. The ancestry breakdown. Poppy's paternal line showed a significant percentage of Ashkenazi Jewish heritage. Judith's family is Irish Catholic. Her husband Gerald claimed pure English stock going back to the Mayflower. He had a framed family tree in his study. He'd bored us all with it, at every holiday for 20 years. Judith stared at those results for a week. She ran them again through the kit company's database. She cross-referenced. She called the company's support line and argued with a 22-year-old lab tech. The results didn't change. And then, she did something that I still can't fully comprehend. She dug deeper. She upgraded to the full relative matching service. That's when the real bomb went off. Gerald had a match in the system. A half-sibling. A woman named Ruth Abelman, 61 years old, living in Queens. Gerald's biological father, it turned out, was not the Connecticut WASP patriarch whose name was on the family tree. His biological father was a man named Solomon Katz, who had a brief affair with Gerald's mother in 1958 and never knew he'd fathered a child. Gerald's mother had taken that secret to her grave. Gerald himself apparently had no idea. Or maybe he did. That part's still unclear. Now, a normal person, a decent person, would have sat with this information privately. Would have maybe talked to Gerald alone, gently. Would have recognized that this was a painful, complicated revelation that deserved care and discretion. But Judith is not a normal person. Judith is a woman who had spent a month building a Thanksgiving ambush designed to destroy her daughter-in-law's marriage in front of 15 family members. And when her ammunition changed shape, she didn't stand down. She just picked a different target. Thanksgiving Day. The house smelled like sage and roasting turkey. Gerald was in his usual chair, scotch in hand, holding court about some golf tournament. Derek's sister Lauren was there with her husband. Derek's uncle, Phil, and Aunt Margot had driven up from New Jersey. I was in the kitchen mashing potatoes and trying to survive another holiday in that house. Judith waited until everyone was seated. She waited until Gerald had said grace, the same grace he said every year, thanking God for their family's heritage and blessings. And then before anyone picked up a fork, she stood up. "I have something to share with the family," she said. Her voice was calm, rehearsed. She pulled a manila envelope from under her chair. I remember thinking, "Oh God, this is about me." My stomach dropped. I looked at Derek, and he looked confused. "I took it upon myself to do some genetic testing," Judith said. I had concerns about Poppy's parentage. Derek's face went red. "Mom, what the hell?" "Let me finish." She held up her hand. "The results confirm that Poppy is indeed your daughter, Derek." "Congratulations." She didn't look at me. But they also revealed something else. She turned to Gerald. And the room went silent in a way I've never experienced before. Not quiet, but vacuum sealed. Like all the air had been sucked out. "Gerald," she said, "your mother lied to you. Your father was not Richard Whitfield. Your biological father was a Jewish man from Brooklyn named Solomon Katz. You have a half-sister named Ruth. She's alive. She lives in Queens." Gerald didn't move. He sat there with his scotch glass frozen halfway to his mouth, and his face did something I'll never forget. It crumbled. Not dramatically. It just sort of collapsed inward like a building being demolished in slow motion. "That's not possible," he whispered. "It's all here." Judith slid the papers across the table right through the gravy boat. "Your entire identity, Gerald, a lie." Uncle Phil stood up. Lauren started crying. Derek grabbed my hand under the table so hard it hurt. And Gerald, 72-year-old Gerald, who had built his entire personality around his family name, his lineage, his place in the social hierarchy of coastal Connecticut, Gerald looked at his wife and said the most devastating thing I've ever heard one spouse say to another. "You did this to humiliate me. You went behind everyone's back to prove Cassie was a whore, and when that didn't work, you just aimed the gun at me instead." Judith's composure cracked for the first time. "I was trying to protect this family." "You were trying to destroy it," Gerald slammed his hand on the table. Glasses rattled. The turkey platter jumped. 40 years, Judith. 40 years I've been married to you, and this is what you do with a secret about my dead mother. You announce it over Thanksgiving dinner like it's a goddamn party trick. He stood up, dropped his napkin on his plate, and walked out of the dining room. We heard the front door open and close. Then his car started in the driveway. And then it was quiet again. Judith sat back down slowly. She looked around the table like she expected someone to thank her. No one did. Derek and I left within the hour. Lauren wouldn't speak to her mother. Uncle Phil called Judith a word I won't repeat and drove back to New Jersey before dessert. Gerald didn't come home that night. Or the next. He checked into a hotel and hired a divorce attorney by Monday morning. He eventually reached out to Ruth Abelman. They met for coffee in January. I hear they talk regularly now. He says it's the one good thing that came out of the whole disaster. Judith lives alone in that big house now. She calls Derek every week, and every week he lets it go to voicemail. She sent Poppy a birthday card in March. Derek threw it away unopened. I almost felt bad about that. Almost. She wanted to blow up my family. She blew up her own instead. And Poppy's fine. She's walking now, getting into everything, laughing at the dog. She has no idea that her grandmother once stole her pacifier to try to prove she was illegitimate. I hope she never finds out. But if she does, I'll tell her the truth that the people most obsessed with bloodlines and purity and who belongs where are usually the ones with the most to hide. Every single time.
Story 2.
I trusted my neighbor for 11 years. He came to our barbecues. He watched our kids grow up. He shook my hand every Sunday morning on his way to church. Bible tucked under his arm, that warm smile spread across his face like butter on toast. And every single one of those mornings before the sun came up, he'd already been inside my garage, helping himself, taking whatever he wanted. My name is Craig. I'm 43 years old, and I live, or lived, depending on how you look at it, on a quiet cul-de-sac in North Leeds. The kind of street where people still wave at each other, where you leave a parcel on someone's step if they're not home, where you don't lock everything down because you think you don't need to. I was wrong about that. It started small. So small I felt stupid even noticing. A socket wrench set I could have sworn I left on the workbench. A half-full jerry can of petrol that seemed emptier than it should have been. An Amazon package that tracking said was delivered but wasn't on the porch when I got home. My wife Laura told me I was losing it. You're 43, Craig, not 23. You forget things. And I believed her. For weeks, I believed her. But then my cordless drill vanished. A Makita. Brand new. Still in the box. I'd bought it on a Saturday, and by Monday morning it was gone. That's not forgetting. That's something else entirely. I mentioned it casually to my neighbor Malcolm. Malcolm Priestley. 61 years old, retired civil servant, sang in the church choir, kept his hedges trimmed to military precision. I said, Mal, you haven't seen anyone poking around the garages, have you? I've had a few bits go missing. He shook his head slowly, furrowed his brow like he was genuinely concerned. That's terrible, Craig. Might be those lads from the estate. Want me to keep an eye out? I thanked him. I actually thanked him. Laura thought I was overreacting when I ordered the cameras. 2 small ones, one for the driveway, one inside the garage tucked behind a shelf where you'd never spot them. Wireless motion-activated feeding straight to an app on my phone. Cost me about 90 quid. Best money I ever spent. I set them up on a Thursday evening after dark. Didn't tell anyone. Not Laura, not the kids, not Malcolm. I wanted clean footage with no variables. Friday morning, I woke up at 5:30, made a coffee, and opened the app. There were 14 motion alerts, starting at 4:47 a.m. I tapped the first clip. The driveway camera showed a figure approaching from the left, from Malcolm's side of the fence. He was wearing a dark fleece and trainers. No torch. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He walked straight to my garage side door, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a key. A key. Not a crowbar, not a lockpick. A key. He opened the door, stepped inside, and the second camera caught him clear as day. He browsed my shelves like he was in a bloody supermarket. Picked up a tin of wood stain, examined it, put it back. Grabbed a box of screws. Took it to measure. Checked the workbench drawers. Found a 20-pound note I'd left in a coffee tin and pocketed it without blinking. Then he left. Locked the door behind him. Walked back to his house. The whole thing took 11 minutes. I watched it 3 times. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From something worse. From the feeling of realizing that the world you thought you lived in doesn't actually exist. I checked the previous nights. The camera had only been active since Thursday, so I only had the one recording. But the ease of it, the routine told me everything. This wasn't new. This was ritual. I didn't confront him that day. I wanted more. I needed to understand the scale of it. So I waited. Saturday morning, 4:51 a.m. There he was again. This time, he took a pair of secateurs and a half bottle of white spirit. Sunday, 4:44 a.m. He took nothing, just looked around like he was taking inventory. On Sunday afternoon, he knocked on my door holding a plate of scones his wife had baked. "Janet's been on a baking spree," he said, laughing. I took the plate. I looked at his face. That smile. Those kind eyes. And I felt sick. Monday morning, I went to the police. They were interested, but not urgent. Told me to gather more footage, keep a log, don't confront him alone. Standard advice. But I couldn't wait. I couldn't sit across from this man at the next street barbecue and pretend I didn't know. So that evening, I walked over and knocked on his door. Janet answered. Lovely woman, always had been. "Craig, come in, love, kettle's just boiled." I said I needed to speak to Malcolm. She called him down. He appeared at the top of the stairs in his slippers, reading glasses perched on his nose, looking every inch the harmless retiree. I didn't sit down. I stood in their hallway and I said, "Malcolm, I put cameras in my garage." The glasses came off. Slowly. He folded them and held them in both hands like a man holding a small dead bird. "I see," he said. "I've got footage of you entering my garage at 4:45 in the morning. Multiple days. Using a key. Taking my things." Janet looked at him. Then at me. Then back at him. "Malcolm, what's he talking about?" He didn't deny it. That's what haunts me. He didn't even try. He just stood there on the third step of his staircase and said very quietly, "It got out of hand." Out of hand, I could hear my own voice cracking. "You copied my garage key. When did you even get access to it?" He looked at the floor. "Years ago. You left your keys on the kitchen counter during a dinner party." I took an impression. Had one cut the next day. Janet sat down on the hallway bench like her legs had given out. She was white. Completely white. "How long?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. I asked again, louder. "How long, Malcolm?" "Since about 2 years after we moved in," he said. 11 years. My neighbor had been entering my garage for approximately 9 years. Regularly, methodically. Before dawn. While my family slept 20 feet away, I asked him why. I genuinely wanted to understand. Was it money? Was it compulsion? Was it some kind of illness? He looked up at me with those same kind eyes and said, "I don't know, Craig. I liked having access." That sentence broke something in me. Not I needed the money, not I couldn't help myself. He liked having access to my things, to my space, to my life. Like it was a privilege he'd granted himself. I left without shouting. I didn't need to. The look on Janet's face was punishment enough for one evening. But here's where it gets worse. I told Laura. Laura told her friend Denise across the street. Denise told her husband Phil. Phil checked his own security footage from the week before. He'd installed cameras months ago after a separate suspicion about missing garden tools. Malcolm was on Phil's footage too. Different time. 5:15 a.m. Different garage. Same routine. Same calm, unhurried browsing. Within 48 hours, 4 households on our street had found footage of Malcolm entering their properties. 4. The Patels at number 12 found he'd been taking small amounts of diesel from their car, siphoning it, actually with a tube he apparently kept behind their own wheelie bin. The Hendersons discovered he'd been accessing their garden shed and had even moved a spare key they kept hidden under a pot. He knew where everyone hid everything. The police arrested him on Wednesday. He was cooperative. Polite, even. Admitted to everything in his interview, apparently. Gave a full account going back years. The officers told me, off the record, that they'd never seen anything quite like it. Not violent. Not overtly criminal in the dramatic sense. Just this quiet, systematic parasitism stretching back over a decade. He was charged with multiple counts of burglary and theft. Janet moved out within the month, went to stay with her sister in Harrogate. The house went up for sale by autumn. The street never recovered. Not really. People installed cameras, changed locks, added bolts. Neighbors who chatted freely for years now nodded curtly and went inside. The trust that made our little cul-de-sac feel like a community had been hollowed out from the inside slowly over years. We didn't even notice. I still think about what Malcolm said. I liked having access. That's the thing about trust. You give it freely because it costs you nothing. Till you find out someone's been spending it behind your back every single morning while you sleep.
Story 3.
I trusted my sister with my dead husband's money, and she fed it to a food truck. Let me say that again so it lands the way it landed on me. My sister, Denise, my blood, my best friend since we shared a bunk bed in Decatur, took $47,000 that was supposed to send my daughter to college, and she spent it on a rolling kitchen that sells overpriced jerk chicken out of a parking lot off Buford Highway. Every single cent of it. Gone. My husband Marcus died 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that gives you a diagnosis and a countdown in the same sentence. He was 39. Our daughter Zoe was 15. He fought for 11 months, and then one Tuesday morning in November, he just stopped breathing while I was making coffee in the next room. I didn't even get to hold his hand. Marcus was careful, meticulous. He had a $250,000 life insurance policy through his job at Delta. When it paid out, I was a wreck. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. I damn sure couldn't manage finances. So when Denise offered to help, she'd done bookkeeping for a dentist's office, she knew QuickBooks, she was family, I said yes without hesitating. I set up a separate account for Zoe's college fund. $47,000 earmarked and untouchable. I made Denise a co-signer so she could manage the account while I managed my grief. That was the worst decision of my life. Zoe got accepted to Spelman this past March. Full of joy, full of plans, already picking out dorm bedding. I was so proud I cried for 2 hours. Marcus would have been over the moon. I told her not to worry about money. Daddy took care of it. And then I logged into the account to start transferring funds for the first tuition installment. The balance was $1,211.43. I stared at the screen for so long and went to sleep. I refreshed it. I called the bank. I asked if there was an error. There was no error. Over the past 14 months, the account had been bled dry through a series of cashier's checks and electronic transfers, all authorized by the cosigner. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. I pulled the transaction history and started scrolling. $5,000 here. $3,000 there. $8,000 in one single withdrawal last October. The payees were a mix. Some went to a business account registered to something called D&R Flavor Co., LLC. Some went to an auto body shop. Some went to a name I recognized. Rodney Price, Denise's boyfriend of 2 years. A man who once borrowed $40 from me and never paid it back. I called Denise. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I texted her, "Call me now." "It's about Zoe's account." She texted back 20 minutes later, "Hey girl, super busy, what's up?" Like everything was normal. Like she hadn't hollowed out my daughter's future and used it as startup capital for her boyfriend's dream. I drove to her apartment in Smyrna. She opened the door in a bathrobe, smiling, and I walked past her into the kitchen and put my phone on the counter with the bank statement pulled up. I said, "Where is my daughter's money, Denise?" The smile dropped. Not all at once. It kind of slid off her face in stages, like she was calculating how much I knew before deciding which lie to tell. "It's an investment," she said. That was her opening move. An investment. She said Rodney's food truck was about to take off. They'd been featured on some local blog. They had a catering contract lined up for a church in Marietta. She said the money would come back doubled. She said she was going to surprise me. I asked her when. When was this magical return on investment going to materialize? Because Zoe's first tuition payment was due in 9 weeks. 9 weeks, Denise! She started crying. And here's what kills me. For about 30 seconds, I almost felt bad for her. That's how deep the conditioning runs. She's my older sister. She protected me when we were kids. She held me at Marcus's funeral. My body wanted to comfort her, even while my brain was screaming that she'd stolen from my child. Rodney said it would work, she kept saying. He showed me the numbers. He promised. Rodney. A 44-year-old man who'd been fired from Waffle House, who drove a leased Dodge Charger he couldn't afford, who had Denise so wrapped around his finger that she'd commit financial fraud for him. I asked, "Denise, point blank, did Rodney know where the money came from?" She wouldn't look at me. That was my answer. I lost it. Not screaming, worse. I got quiet. I told her she stole from a dead man's daughter. I told her Marcus worked overtime for years, so Zoe wouldn't have to take out loans, and she handed that sacrifice to a man who can't keep a job. I told her she was the one person I trusted after I lost everything, and she used that trust like a credit card. She grabbed my arm and said, "I'm your sister. I would never hurt you on purpose." I pulled away. "You didn't do this by accident, Denise. You wrote checks. You made transfers. You did it 14 times. Over 14 months. That's not a mistake. That's a plan." She begged me not to go to the police. She said it would destroy the family. She said our mother would never recover. She said give Rodney 6 months and he'd pay it all back. 6 months. Zoe's tuition was due in 9 weeks. Spellman doesn't take IOUs from food truck entrepreneurs. I left her apartment and sat in my car in the parking lot for 45 minutes. I called my mother. I told her everything. She was silent for a long time, and then she said something that broke me all over again. "I wish you hadn't told me that." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "That's wrong." She wished I'd kept it to myself. Because now she'd have to choose sides, and choosing sides meant losing a daughter, either way. I went home and told Zoe. She deserved to know. She sat on her bed with her Spellman acceptance letter pinned to the corkboard behind her, and she didn't cry. She just nodded slowly, like she was absorbing a blow she'd been half expecting her whole life, the universe taking something good away the way it took her father. That look on my 17-year-old daughter's face, that resignation, that's what made my decision for me. I filed a police report the next morning. I hired a lawyer that afternoon, a woman named Tasha, who specialized in financial fraud and didn't flinch when I told her the thief was my sister. I also contacted Spellman's financial aid office, explained my situation, and begged for an extension. They gave me one. 12 weeks instead of 9. Denise called me 19 times that week. I answered once. She screamed at me. She said I was tearing the family apart. She said I was choosing money over blood. I said, no, Denise, you did that. I'm just filling out the paperwork. Rodney's food truck, by the way, failed. Shut down 6 weeks after I filed the report. Health code violations and a lease he couldn't pay. $47,000 gone into cooking equipment that got repossessed. A truck wrap that's now peeling in a storage lot, and rent for a commissary kitchen he used for 4 months. My lawyer got a judgment against Denise for the full amount plus legal fees. She doesn't have it. Rodney certainly doesn't have it. We've started garnishment proceedings, which means I'll get it back in small, humiliating installments over the next several years. Zoe started at Spelman this fall. I took out a parent loan to cover the gap. It'll take me a decade to pay off. I work nights now on top of my day job sorting packages at a UPS hub, so the interest doesn't eat me alive. My mother still talks to Denise. She still talks to me. But she talks to us separately now, like we're two halves of a broken plate she keeps in different drawers. Thanksgiving is coming up and nobody's mentioned it. Denise sent me a text last week. It said, I'm sorry. I love you. Can we talk? I read it. I put my phone down. And I went to my second job. Some debts don't get repaid with money. And some family bonds aren't bonds at all. They're just habits you haven't broken yet.
Story 4.
I spent 41 years surveying land in East Tennessee. 41 years walking property lines, driving stakes, reading the earth like a book most people don't even know exists. So when I tell you I know where my property ends and my neighbor's begins, I need you to understand that's not an opinion. That's a fact, carved into the bedrock of everything I am. I retired in 2021. Bought a nice 3-acre parcel outside Greeneville, up against the foothills. Quiet place. Old Hardwoods, a creek that runs year-round, a view of the Smokies from my back porch that makes you forget the world's gone sideways. My wife Carol, she passed 2 years before, and I wanted somewhere I could just be still. Just exist for a while, without anyone needing anything from me. I got about 14 months of that peace. Then Trent Ballard moved in next door. Now Ballard wasn't some regular guy buying a house. He was a developer. Had his fingers in half the residential projects in Greene County. Built subdivisions, flipped commercial lots, sat on the planning commission for 6 years before term limits finally pushed him out. The kind of man who shakes your hand while his other hand is in your back pocket. He bought the adjacent property in March of 2022 and immediately started renovating. Tore out the old landscaping, brought in heavy equipment, started grading the backyard. I didn't think much of it at first. Man's got a right to improve his own land. But then one morning in June, I walked my property line the way I always do, old habits, and I stopped dead. The chain link fence that had separated our properties for at least 20 years had been pulled up and reset. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just 8 feet further onto my side. 8 feet doesn't sound like much until you realize it runs 160 feet along the back boundary. That's nearly 1,300 square feet of my land. And right there, on what was now supposedly his side, concrete forms were already going in for a pool deck. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it, feeling something cold settle in my chest. I went to talk to him first. I'm not unreasonable. I walked over, knocked on his door, told him calmly that his fence was off the mark. He smiled at me the way you smile at a confused old dog. Told me I must be mistaken. Said he'd had the property surveyed before closing and everything was exactly where it should be. Then he offered me a beer like that was going to make it all go away. I declined the beer. I went home and pulled out my own copy of the plat I'd reviewed before I bought my place. Clear as day, the boundary was where I knew it was. 8 feet from where his new fence sat. So the next morning I drove to the Greene County Register of Deeds to pull the original plat records. They weren't there. The clerk, a young woman who seemed genuinely confused, told me the file for my parcel's subdivision plat had been checked out and never returned. No record of who took it, no sign-out sheet, just gone. I asked about the digital backup. She said the system had been migrated 2 years prior and some older records hadn't transferred correctly. Now, a normal person might have panicked, might have hired a lawyer right then and started throwing money at the problem. But I'm not a normal person. I'm a surveyor. And a surveyor doesn't panic when records go missing. A surveyor goes deeper. I started with the state archives in Nashville. Took me a full day's drive and 3 hours in a basement that smelled like mildew and forgotten history. But I found the original 1,987 subdivision plat on microfilm. Clear, legible, and absolutely unambiguous about where my property line fell. I had certified copies made. Then I went further back. Found the 1,923 deed that described the original parcel before subdivision, referencing iron pins and old oak trees, 2 of which were still standing on my land. I cross-referenced that with USGS topographic surveys from the 1940s. Every single source agreed. While I was building my paper trail, Ballard's pool deck was going up fast. Concrete poured pavers, laid a beautiful stone-capped retaining wall. $60,000 of construction, easy. All of it sitting on my dirt. I bought a drone. Taught myself to fly it in an afternoon. I'm old, not stupid. Started documenting everything from the air. Timestamp footage showing the original fence post holes still visible in the grass. The new fence line, the construction progress. I flew that drone every 3 days for 2 months. Built a visual record that would make a forensic analyst weep with joy. Then I did something that changed everything. I pulled Ballard's building permits. His pool deck permit referenced a site plan. That site plan showed the property boundary exactly where his new fence was, 8 feet onto my land. The site plan had been approved by the county zoning office, signed off by a man named Dale Hutchins, who happened to be the current zoning administrator and who also happened to have been Ballard's business partner on a strip mall development in 2018. I sat at my kitchen table that night with all of it spread out in front of me. The certified plats, the century-old deeds, the drone footage, the permit records, the business connection between Ballard and Hutchins. And I felt something I hadn't felt since Carol died. Purpose. I hired an attorney. Not a local one, I went to Knoxville. Found a woman named Patricia Reeves who specialized in property disputes and had a reputation for being absolutely merciless in court. I showed her everything. She looked at it for about 20 minutes, then looked up at me and said, "Mr. Hardin, this man is going to wish he'd never heard your name." We filed suit in Chancery Court. Trespass, encroachment, and fraudulent alteration of public records. But Patricia added something I hadn't even considered. She invoked Tennessee Code Annotated 282101, a provision in the adverse possession statute that most people read as protecting long-term possessors. She flipped it. Used it to establish that because I had maintained continuous documented use of that strip of land for over 2 years before the fence was moved, mowing it, walking it, keeping it clear, Ballard couldn't claim any possessory right, even if the records had supported him, which they didn't. Ballard hired a big firm out of Johnson City. They came in confident. Filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the boundary dispute was a simple surveying disagreement. The judge denied the motion in 11 minutes. Discovery was where it got ugly. Patricia subpoenaed Ballard's entire permit history going back 10 years. Every project, every approval, every interaction with the zoning board. What came out was a pattern so brazen it made the judge visibly angry. Ballard had received expedited approvals on 7 different projects, all signed off by Hutchins. 2 of those projects had boundary descriptions that didn't match county records. One had a setback variance granted without the required public hearing. The missing plat from the Register of Deeds digital access logs showed that someone using a county employee login had accessed that file's record 4 days before it disappeared. The login belonged to a clerk in Hutchins' office. In open court, under oath, Hutchins tried to claim he didn't recall approving Ballard's site plan. Patricia put the signed document in front of him. Then she put his business partnership records next to it. Then she played my drone footage showing the original fence post holes measured and annotated, proving the line had been moved. Hutchins looked at Ballard across the courtroom. Ballard wouldn't look back. The judge ruled in my favor on every count. Full restoration of the property line. And because Ballard had knowingly built a permanent structure on land he knew wasn't his using permits, he knew were fraudulently obtained, the court ordered complete demolition of the pool deck at his expense. Every paver, every footing, every inch of that $60,000 monument to arrogance torn out and hauled away. He also referred the matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into the missing public records. Last I heard, Hutchins resigned quietly. Ballard's development company lost 2 pending project approvals while the investigation played out. I watched them demolish the deck on a Tuesday morning in October. Stood on my porch with a cup of coffee. Didn't gloat. Didn't wave. Just watched. Ballard put his house on the market 3 weeks later. People asked me if it was worth it. The months of work, the legal fees, the stress. And I tell them the same thing every time. A man who won't defend his boundaries doesn't have any. Carol knew that about me. It's why she married me. And it's why every evening I still walk my property line. Every single inch of it.
Story 5.
I haven't slept more than 3 consecutive hours in 11 months. That's not an exaggeration. That's not the kind of thing tired moms say to get sympathy at the pediatrician's office. I mean it literally. 11 months of fractured sleep, of waking to my daughter, screaming like something was tearing her apart from the inside. And everyone, my husband, my doctor, my mother-in-law, kept telling me it was normal. Toddlers have nightmares. Toddlers go through phases. But here's the thing about being a mother running on fumes. Your logic gets foggy, sure. But your instincts get sharper. Almost animal. And my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I just didn't know the something was a person I was supposed to trust. My daughter Lily turned 2 in March. She was a happy baby, the kind strangers smile at in grocery stores. Easygoing. Curious. Laughed at everything. But somewhere around last fall, she started changing. Not dramatically at first. She'd cling to me a little harder at bedtime. Then she started crying when I'd leave the room. Then came the night terrors, full body, rigid eyes, open screaming that no amount of holding could fix. My husband Marcus said it was developmental. His mother Diane said I was coddling her. And I was too exhausted to argue with either of them. Diane had been babysitting every Thursday since Lily was 4 months old. It was her idea, pitched as a gift. You need a break, sweetheart. Let me take my grandbaby for the day. And at first, it was a gift. I'd sleep. I'd clean the house without a toddler on my hip. I'd feel human again for 6 hours. But I started noticing things. Small things. My filing cabinet slightly ajar when I came home. a drawer in my bedroom that I always kept locked sitting unlocked. Papers on my desk rearranged in ways I couldn't quite prove, but could feel. And Lily. Lily was always different on Thursday nights. Quieter. Clingy in a way that felt like fear, not affection. She'd grab my shirt and whisper no-go over and over until she fell asleep. I told Marcus. He said I was sleep-deprived and paranoid. He said his mother had raised 3 kids and had never so much as raised her voice. He said I needed to see a therapist, not accuse his family. So I stopped talking to Marcus about it. And I bought a nanny cam. 2 of them, actually. One disguised as a stuffed elephant on Lily's bookshelf. One built into a digital clock I placed on the kitchen counter. I set them up on a Wednesday night while Marcus was at a work dinner and Diane was blissfully unaware. The next morning, Thursday, I kissed Lily goodbye, told Diane there were snacks in the fridge, and drove to a coffee shop 6 minutes away. I sat in a parking lot with my laptop open and the live feed running. And I watched. For the first hour, everything was normal. Diane played with Lily, read her a book, made her lunch. I almost felt guilty. Almost closed the laptop and drove to Target like I usually did. Then, Lily went down for her nap. The second Diane heard the white noise machine click on through the monitor, she moved. Not casually, purposefully. She went straight to our bedroom, pulled a key from her purse, a key I had never given her, and opened my filing cabinet. She pulled out our tax returns, our bank statements, Marcus's pay stubs, my medical records from when I was treated for postpartum anxiety. She photographed every single page with her phone. Methodically. Front and back. She even adjusted the lighting on one document to get a clearer shot. This was not the first time she had done this. Her hands didn't shake. She didn't look over her shoulder. She moved like someone executing a routine. Then she put everything back, locked the cabinet, returned the key to her purse, and went to check on Lily. What happened next is the part I still can't talk about without my chest tightening. Lily was awake, sitting up in her crib, quiet, watching the door. Diane leaned over the railing and started talking to her in this low, steady voice. Almost soothing. Almost sweet. She said, "Mommy and Daddy are going to go away soon, sweetheart. But Grandma's going to take care of you. Grandma's always going to be here. You don't need to be scared. They're going to go away, but Grandma won't." My 2-year-old daughter stared up at her grandmother and started to cry. Not a tantrum cry. A terrified, silent cry. The kind where the mouth opens but nothing comes out at first. And Diane picked her up and shushed her and said, "See, this is why you need Grandma. Mommy can't help you. Mommy's sick." I sat in that parking lot and I shook so hard I couldn't hold my coffee. I watched the screen blur through tears I didn't even realize were falling. I drove home. I don't remember the drive. I walked through the front door and Diane looked up from the couch where she was holding my daughter and she smiled at me. That same warm grandmother smile. And I smiled back. Because I knew something she didn't know. I knew I had every second of it recorded in high definition with a timestamp. I let 3 more Thursdays pass. I know that sounds insane. I know people will judge me for that. But I needed more than one recording. I needed a pattern. I needed evidence that no judge, no lawyer, no husband could dismiss as a one-time lapse in judgment. And every Thursday, Diane delivered. She searched different drawers. She found and photographed our life insurance policy. She found the password notebook I kept in my nightstand, the one with our bank logins. She whispered the same poison into my daughter's ear every single time. Variations on a theme. "Mommy's going away. Daddy doesn't love you enough. Only Grandma is safe." On the 3rd Thursday, she brought a folder from her own purse and I watched her compare our financial documents to something she'd already printed out. I zoomed in on the feed later. They were custody petition templates, downloaded from a Colorado family law website, with blanks already filled in. She was building a case. She was documenting our finances, my mental health history, our schedules. She was psychologically conditioning my toddler to be afraid of her own parents so that when the time came when she filed, Lily would cling to her in front of a social worker and it would look like proof. I had 72 hours of footage. I called a family attorney before I told Marcus. The attorney watched 20 minutes of the recordings, went quiet, and then said, "This is one of the most calculated things I've seen in 15 years of practice." She told me to file for a restraining order. She told me to change every lock in the house. She told me to document Lily's behavioral changes with our pediatrician immediately. Then she asked if my husband was involved. I said no. I said he'd never believe it. She looked at me and said, "He's going to have to." I showed Marcus the footage on a Sunday night after Lily was asleep. I didn't say anything first. I just opened the laptop, pressed play, and sat next to him. He watched his mother unlock our filing cabinet with a key she'd apparently copied. He watched her photograph our tax returns. He watched her lean over our daughter's crib and tell a 2-year-old that her parents were going to abandon her. And then he closed the laptop. Gently. Like it was something fragile. And he said, "There has to be a context we're missing." I felt something break inside me that wasn't sadness. It was the last thread of patience I had been holding on to for 11 months of sleepless nights and gaslighting and watching my daughter deteriorate. I said, "Marcus, your mother is stealing our financial information and terrorizing our child to build a custody case against us. There is no missing context." He said I was overreacting. He said his mother probably just wanted to help with our finances. He said maybe she was just reassuring Lily in a clumsy way. I said, "She has custody petition templates in her purse, Marcus, with our names on them." He went quiet for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother. Right there, in front of me. And he told her what I'd found. Diane didn't deny it. That's the part that still haunts me. She didn't even try. She said, and I will never forget these words, "I'm doing what's best for that child because neither of you are capable." She said, "My anxiety made me an unfit mother." She said Marcus was too passive to protect his own daughter. She said she'd been consulting with an attorney for 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of Thursdays. Of smiling at me while she dismantled my family from the inside. Marcus hung up the phone and didn't speak to me for 2 days. The restraining order was granted on a Tuesday. Diane is prohibited from contacting Lily or coming within 500 feet of our home. Her copied key was confiscated. Our locks were changed. Our financial accounts were frozen and reopened with new credentials. Lily started seeing a child psychologist who specializes in emotional manipulation in young children. After 3 sessions, the psychologist told me that what Diane had done was a textbook form of psychological abuse, deliberately destabilizing a child's attachment to their parents to create dependency on the abuser. My daughter wasn't having night terrors because of a developmental phase. She was having them because her grandmother was systematically teaching her that her parents were going to disappear. Marcus and I are still married. But something between us is broken in a way I don't know how to fix. He goes through the motions. He agreed to the restraining order. He stopped speaking to his mother. But he looks at me sometimes like I'm the one who destroyed something. Like I'm the one who detonated the bomb instead of the person who found it before it went off. His brother called me last week and said I'd torn their family apart. His father sent a letter saying Diane meant well. Lily sleeps through the night now. 5 straight hours last Tuesday. She woke up, looked at me and said, "Mama, here?" Not a question. A statement. Like she was confirming something she'd been afraid to believe. held her so tight she squirmed. And I whispered back, "Mama's here." Mama's not going anywhere. I don't regret the cameras. I don't regret the restraining order. I don't regret any of it. But I will never forgive myself for every Thursday I handed my daughter to that woman and drove away. And I will never stop wondering how close she came to pulling it off.
Story 6.
I got a letter in my mailbox on a Tuesday telling me my mailbox was wrong. Not broken. Not falling over. Not offensive. Just wrong. Non-compliant. With Section 14, subsection 3B of the Ridgecrest Villas Homeowners Association Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. My mailbox, the one that came with the house when I bought it 6 years ago, was apparently 3/4 of an inch too tall and painted in a shade of black that wasn't the approved shade of black. The fine was $200 per week until corrected. And that's how I met the real Gerald Pruitt. Everybody in the neighborhood knew Gerald. Retired insurance adjuster. 63 years old. Khaki shorts, white New Balance sneakers, clipboard always tucked under his arm like he was conducting a building inspection on the Hoover Dam. He'd been HOA president for about 18 months by the time that letter landed in my allegedly criminal mailbox, and for most of that time, people thought he was just annoying. Fussy. The kind of guy who'd measure your grass with a ruler and feel righteous about it. But Gerald wasn't fussy. Gerald was strategic. And I was too busy working 2 jobs and raising my daughter alone to see what he was actually doing until he came for me. 6 months before the mailbox letter, Gerald had proposed installing a gated entry system for our subdivision. Not a simple arm gate. A full decorative wrought iron automated gate with a guardhouse camera's keypad accessed the whole production. Price tag $85,000, funded through a special assessment that would cost every homeowner roughly $2,200. The vote was 31-19 against. I was one of the 31. I didn't have $2,200 lying around. I was stretching every paycheck to cover my mortgage, my daughter Lily's braces, and groceries that seemed to cost more every single month. I voted no, and I thought that was the end of it. It was the beginning. Within 3 months of that vote, 7 homeowners who'd voted no received violation notices. Barbara Chen got cited for a window AC unit that had been there for 4 years. Mark and David Ostrowski were fined for having a commercial vehicle in their driveway, Mark's work van, with a small plumbing logo on the door. The Wynns were told their backyard fence was 2 inches too close to the property line. Every single fine was steep. Every single one came with threatening language about liens and legal action. And every single recipient had voted against Gerald's gate. I didn't connect the dots at first. I was too busy panicking about my own situation. $200 a week. That's what Gerald was charging me for a mailbox. I called the management company the HOA used some outfit called Desert Peak Community Services and got a woman named Trish who sounded like she'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. She told me I needed to submit a modification request to replace the mailbox with an approved model, wait for board approval, then complete the work within 30 days. The approved mailbox cost $180. The modification request fee was $75. And during the weeks I waited for approval, the fines would keep accumulating. I did the math on a napkin at my kitchen table and felt my stomach drop. By the time I could fix the problem, I'd owe over $1,000 in fines for a mailbox that had been perfectly fine for 6 years. That's when I started paying attention to the rest of the neighborhood. And that's when I noticed Carl Jessup's garage. Carl lived right next door to me. He and Gerald were tight. They went to the same church, played golf together on Saturdays. And Carl had been one of the 19 who'd voted yes on the gate. Carl had converted his 2-car garage into a living space about 8 months earlier. I'm talking drywall, carpet, a mini-split AC unit, the works. His nephew lived in there, no permits. No modification request. No approval from the HOA, and no fines. I walked past it every single day. The garage door was permanently sealed shut with weather stripping visible from the street. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. Gerald drove past it every time he did his little patrol around the neighborhood. He just didn't see it. Because he didn't want to. That realization changed something in me. I went from scared to angry in about 48 hours. I started knocking on doors. Not all of them, just the ones I knew had gotten violation notices. Barbara answered hers with red eyes like she'd been crying. The Ostrowskis were furious, but felt helpless. The Newens had already started talking to a lawyer, and every single one of them had voted no on the gate. I sat in Barbara's living room with 5 other homeowners, and we laid it all out on her dining table. Every notice, every fine, every date. The pattern was undeniable. Gerald Pruitt was using the CC and ours as a weapon, selectively enforcing rules against people who'd opposed him and ignoring identical or worse violations by his allies. I started documenting everything. I took photos of Carl's garage. I photographed another Yes Voters RV parked on the street for 3 weeks straight, a clear violation that went unnoticed. I found a house on Mesquite Lane with Christmas lights still up in April, owned by Gerald's golf buddy. No fines, no letters, nothing. Then I did something that changed the entire trajectory of this fight. I filed a public records request for the HOA's financial statements. Desert Peak Community Services was required to maintain them. Trish, the woman who'd rather be anywhere else, sent me a stack of PDFs that I printed out at the library because my printer was out of ink. I'm not an accountant. I sell insurance part-time and bartend weekends. But even I could see that the numbers didn't add up. The HOA collected roughly $96,000 a year in dues. The landscaping contract was $31,000. Insurance was about $8,000. Management fees were $12,000. That left around $45,000 for maintenance reserves and miscellaneous expenses. But the miscellaneous line item had ballooned to over $60,000 in the last fiscal year. $60,000 in miscellaneous expenses for a 150-home subdivision with a community pool and some shared landscaping. Where was that money going? I brought this to the next board meeting. Gerald ran those meetings like a courtroom. Robert's Rules of Order. Timed public comments. 3 minutes per speaker. I stood up with my printed spreadsheets and my photos and I laid it out. I showed the selective enforcement. I showed Carl's garage. I showed the financial discrepancies. I asked calmly where $60,000 in miscellaneous expenses had gone. Gerald cut my microphone at 2 minutes and 47 seconds. He said my time was up. He said my claims were defamatory. He said if I continued to harass the board, the HOA would pursue legal action against me personally. Then he moved to adjourn the meeting. His 2 board allies, both yes voters on the gate, seconded and voted immediately. Meeting over. 19 people were still standing in that community room with their hands raised to speak. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on my back patio at 1 a.m. and thought about selling the house. Just giving up. Lily was asleep inside, and I thought about what it would mean to uproot her from her school, her friends, the only home she'd known since her dad left. I cried for about 10 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and started writing emails. Within a week, I had 23 homeowners signed onto a formal petition to recall the entire board. Arizona law requires a special meeting if 10% of homeowners petition for one. We had more than 15%. We hand-delivered the petition to Desert Peak Community Services with a copy to Gerald's home address. He ignored it. He literally pretended it didn't exist. No meeting was scheduled. No acknowledgement was sent. So we hired a lawyer. The new one's attorney, a woman named Rachel Dominguez, who specialized in HOA disputes, agreed to represent the group at a reduced rate because her words, she'd been waiting for a case like this. Rachel sent a demand letter. Gerald's response through the HOA's attorney was that the petition was procedurally deficient because it used the wrong form. There was no required form. Rachel filed a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. She also subpoenaed the full financial records, not just the summaries I'd gotten, but the actual bank statements, invoices, and receipts. That's when everything fell apart for Gerald Pruitt. The bank statements showed direct transfers to Gerald's personal account totaling $41,000 over 2 years. The invoices for a pool resurfacing project were fabricated. The company listed didn't exist. The meeting minutes from 3 separate board sessions had been altered after the fact, changing vote tallies and removing motions that had been raised from the floor. Gerald hadn't just been a petty tyrant. He'd been stealing from us. From all of us. From the people who supported him and the people who didn't. He'd been writing himself checks from our dues and covering it up with fake paperwork. The recall election happened 6 weeks later, court-ordered, after Gerald tried to block it one final time. He was removed unanimously. Not 31-19. Unanimously. Even Carl Jessup voted to remove him. The new board, which I was asked to join and reluctantly agreed to, immediately waived all outstanding fines from Gerald's selective enforcement campaign. We filed a civil suit to recover the embezzled funds. Gerald's house went on the market 3 months later. Last I heard, he moved to Tucson. I still have the same mailbox. 3/4 of an inch too tall, painted in the wrong shade of black. Nobody said a word about it since. Lily asked me once what the whole thing was about, and I told her the truth, as simply as I could. Some people get a little bit of power, and they think it makes them important. It doesn't. It just makes them dangerous until someone decides to stop being afraid. I decided on a Tuesday, at 1 a.m, on my back patio, and I'd do it again.
Story 7. I know what you think of me. I know the names you'd call me if you knew who I was. And you'd be right. I destroyed my family. I cheated on a good man and had a baby with a stranger. There's no excuse for what I did, but I need someone to hear the story from my side. Not for forgiveness, just for a second to understand how a person can get so lost they'd burn down their own house just to feel the warmth. Before all this, my life looked perfect. My husband, let's call him David, is a genuinely good person. We had 2 beautiful little boys, a nice house in the suburbs. I had a career I loved. From the outside, we were the American dream. But on the inside, I was disappearing. When our first son was born, a piece of me vanished. I wasn't me anymore, I was Mom. When our second son came along, another piece chipped away. I became a collection of functions: chef, maid, nurse, chauffeur. I loved my boys with an ache so deep it hurt, but the love was tangled up in the crushing, endless routine of their needs. David saw a functioning household. He'd come home from work where he was still a person with a name and a purpose, and see that the kids were fed, the house was clean, and his wife smiled on cue. He never saw the person behind the smile who was silently screaming. He never saw that I was drowning in the quiet. It wasn't a loud, dramatic depression. It was a slow, creeping fog. It muffled the whole world and made me feel like I was watching my own life through a thick pane of glass. Then COVID hit and I lost my job. That was the last part of my old self, the last thing that connected me to the person I used to be. Suddenly, I was nothing but mom and wife 24/7. The fog got thicker. I'd spend whole days not speaking to another adult until David got home, and by then he was tired. And I was so numb, I couldn't even form the words to explain how empty I felt. How do you tell the man you love that his perfect life feels like a cage? Last year, David had a work conference in Philadelphia. He couldn't go, but the trip was already paid for, so he suggested I go instead. A long weekend all to myself. A break. He thought it would be a gift. I thought maybe I could breathe again. But I just packed my emptiness into my suitcase and took it with me. I spent the first day wandering around a city full of people who were laughing and talking and living, and I had never felt more invisible in my life. That night I went to the hotel bar. I didn't want to drink, I just wanted to be around noise. I sat in a corner watching people and felt like a ghost. Then a man sat down a few seats away. He smiled. He wasn't trying to pick me up, not at first. He just started talking to me. He asked my name. Not if I was married, not if I had kids. Just my name. And when I said it, it sounded strange, like a word I hadn't used in years. We talked for hours. He was just a guy passing through town on business like me. He was black, funny, and he listened. He saw a woman sitting at a bar, not a collection of duties. For one night I wanted to feel something. Anything other than the crushing numbness. I wanted to do something that was just for me, something that wasn't for my husband or my kids. It was a selfish, stupid, and self-destructive impulse. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about passion or love. It was a scream into the void. A desperate, ugly act by a woman who just wanted to feel real. The regret hit me before he had even left the hotel room. It was a cold, sick feeling in my stomach, a horror at what I had just done. I flew home the next morning and threw myself back into my routine, praying I could bury it, to pretend it was just a bad dream. A few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. The sick feeling turned into pure terror. I lived on a knife's edge for months, praying for a miracle. I told myself that genetics are weird, that maybe the baby would look enough like David that no one would know. I held on to that stupid, impossible hope. But when I gave birth to my daughter, there was no more pretending. She was perfect. Tiny, beautiful, with a head of dark curly hair and skin the color of warm honey. And she looked nothing like my husband or my sons. When David looked at her and then looked at me, his face didn't change. There was no anger, no shouting, just a quiet, awful click as everything fell into place for him. The silence in that hospital room was the loudest sound I've ever heard. My whole world broke in that silence. I confessed everything. There was no point in lying anymore. The truth was right there in my arms. He filed for divorce right away. But we're still here, living in the same house. We can't afford for one of us to move out, and honestly, I'm such a wreck, he's worried about me being alone with the kids. We are living in the wreckage I created. And the cruelest part of it all is his grace. He helps with the baby, my baby. He holds her, he feeds her, he changes her. When his own mother made a disgusting comment about her, he cut her off completely. He defends this perfect, innocent child from the racism of our family and friends. They think her race is the sin. They don't get it. The sin was mine and mine alone. My boys adore their little sister. They don't see color, they just see their baby. And watching David with them, teaching them to be gentle with her, to protect her, It breaks me. He's worried they'll grow up and hate her because of what she represents. He's already teaching them to love her fiercely, to be a wall around her. He is being a father to a child that isn't his in a way that I'm too broken to be a mother to any of them right now. Now he's insisting we find her biological father. He says she deserves to know her history, to have access to her medical information. He says it's the right thing to do for times her asterisk. So he ordered an ancestry DNA kit. He wants me to help him search to reach back into that one night in Philadelphia and find the man whose last name I don't even know. He wants to bring the cause of all this pain right to our doorstep because he thinks it's what's best for my daughter. The man I betrayed is trying to clean up my mess to build something decent for our children from the ashes. We spit in the tubes a few weeks ago and sent them off. I've been dreading it every single day. I check my email with a feeling of pure doom, waiting for the notification. This morning I was feeding the baby when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was an email with the subject line, "Your ancestry DNA results are in." David was in the other room with the boys. I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling like I was standing on a cliff, and the ground was finally about to give way. I took a shaky breath, the baby shifting in my arms. My whole body felt like it was humming with electricity. I could hear David in the living room, the cheerful sound of the TV show he was watching with our boys. It was so normal, so peaceful, and I was about to shatter it all over again. I walked out of the kitchen, my phone clutched in my hand like a bomb. "David," my voice was a whisper. He looked up from the couch, his smile fading when he saw my face. "What's wrong?" I couldn't speak. I just held out the phone. He took it, read the subject line, and all the color drained from his face. He gently took the baby from my arms and handed her to me, then stood up. "Let's go to the office." He led the way, shutting the door behind us. The sounds of the cartoons were muffled now a world away. We sat in front of the computer side by side, not touching. He put my daughter times our times daughter in the bassinet next to the desk. He logged into the website with steady hands I didn't understand. I felt like I was going to throw up. The page loaded full of charts and percentages. My heart was a drum against my ribs. David clicked on DNA relatives. And there it was. Not his name, not the man from the bar, but a name listed as a first cousin. A woman. Below her name was a projected age and a location. Not Philadelphia, but close. My breath hitched. It was real. A real person, a real family connected to my daughter. David was silent for a full minute, just staring at the screen. I expected him to get up and leave. I expected him to finally yell. Instead, he just let out a long, slow breath. "Okay," he said, his voice flat. "This is the first step." He clicked on her profile. There was a picture. A smiling woman who looked nothing and everything like the man I barely remembered. And there was a button. Message. "I can't," I whispered. "David, I can't do this." He turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in his composure. His eyes were bloodshot. "We have to," he said, his voice raw. "This isn't about us anymore. This is about her. She needs this. She needs to have the option to know." He took the keyboard. "What do we say?" I was useless, a frozen statue of guilt. He did it himself. He typed out a message, his fingers moving slowly but deliberately. It was short, polite, and devastating. He explained that we believed her first cousin was the biological father of our newborn daughter, born on this date. He said we were seeking medical history, and if the father was willing a line of communication for the child's sake. He didn't use my name. He just said, her mother. He read it out loud to me, asked if it was okay, and I just nodded, unable to form words. He hit send. The waiting was the worst part of my life. Every buzz of my phone made me jump. For 2 days there was nothing. We moved around each other like ghosts in the house, the unspoken thing hanging in the air between us. David was quiet, but he was still there. He'd take the baby for hours so I could try to sleep. He'd make sure I was eating. He was taking care of me while we waited for the grenade I'd thrown into our lives to finally explode. Then on the 3rd day I got an email. It wasn't from the cousin. It was from a man. The subject line was just my daughter's name. My heart stopped. He said his cousin had forwarded him the message. He said he was shocked. He said he remembered that night in Philadelphia. And he gave me his phone number. He said to call him when I was ready. I showed the email to David. He read it, then looked at me. We should call him together, he said. An hour later, we were back in the office, the baby asleep in her bassinet again. David was sitting next to me, the phone on speaker between us on the desk. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. It rang twice. "Hello," a voice said. The voice from the bar. I froze. David reached over and squeezed my arm, a silent command to speak. "Hi," I croaked. It's me. From Philadelphia." There was a long pause. "Wow. Okay. Hi." He sounded normal. Not angry, not scary. Just like a guy who just had his world turned upside down. "My name is Marcus." And then I had to tell the story. With my husband sitting next to me, I had to explain that I was married, that I had gone home and discovered I was pregnant, and that I had a daughter. A beautiful, healthy little girl. David didn't say a word. He just sat there, a pillar of impossible strength, while I confessed my failure to the stranger I had shared it with. Marcus was quiet for a long time after I finished. "A daughter," he finally said, his voice thick. Is she okay?" "She's perfect," David said, speaking for the first time. His voice was steady and clear. It made Marcus jump on the other end of the line. This is my husband," I stammered. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a building. "Look," David said, taking charge. "I know this is a shock. We're not asking you for anything right now, not money, not anything. But our daughter deserves to have her full medical history. And she deserves to know who her biological father is, if you're ever open to that." They talked for another 20 minutes. David asked about his family's health history. Marcus answered everything. He was stunned, overwhelmed, but he was decent. He has no other children. He isn't married. He kept saying he needed to think. He promised to send a detailed family medical history. Before he hung up, he asked one more question. What's her name? I told him. He repeated it softly, then said, "Goodbye." The call ended. The room was silent again. The awful, suffocating silence. David didn't look at me. He just stared at the wall, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. Then his shoulders started to shake. It wasn't loud, just a quiet, gut-wrenching tremor. He buried his face in his hands and he just broke. For the first time since that day in the hospital, he cried. Not in anger, but in pure, unfiltered pain. The sound of his grief was the price of my actions, and it was a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. I didn't dare touch him. I just sat there, drowned in the horror of what I'd done to this good man. He is filing for divorce, but he still sat by my side and helped me contact my affair partner for the good of a child that isn't his. He absorbed that blow for her and for me. That was a week ago. Marcus sent the medical history. David is talking about setting up a trust for her in case Marcus ever wants to contribute. He's already thinking 10 steps ahead, building a world for this little girl, trying to stitch together the pieces I shattered. I am still here in the house I destroyed, watching the man I betrayed lovingly build a future from the wreckage. I don't know if he will ever forgive me. I know I will never forgive myself. All I can do now is try to be the mother my children deserve, and honor the grace of a man who has shown me a love I never earned, and a kindness I will never be able to repay.
Story 8.
I need to tell my side of the story. I know what she's been saying about me at work to the landlord, to anyone who will listen. She paints me as some crazy old monster, but she doesn't tell people the whole truth. She leaves out the parts that make her look bad, and she has no idea what was really going on in my life. My life has not been easy. You get to be my age, nearly 60, and you start to become invisible. The world belongs to young people, and you're just there. The bills get bigger every year, but the paycheck doesn't. The house gets quieter. My husband passed away years ago, and my kids are grown with their own lives hundreds of miles away. The silence can be deafening. It's not a peaceful quiet. It's a heavy, lonely quiet that presses down on you. When she needed a place to stay, it felt like an answer to a prayer I didn't even know I was saying. She was just a kid, really 23, and new at the company. So quiet and shy. I saw a bit of myself in her from a long, long time ago. I thought this was my chance. I wasn't just getting a roommate to help pay the mortgage. I was getting a chance to have a family again, even a small, strange one. I thought I could help her, guide her a little bit. She seemed so lost. I imagined us making dinner together, watching TV on the couch, talking about our shifts. I was so excited to have that life in the house again, someone to look out for. That dream fell apart almost immediately. The quiet I thought was shyness was actually a fortress. She would come home from work, go straight to her room, and shut the door. I wouldn't see her again until the next morning. It was like living with a ghost. I tried so hard to break through. I'd knock on her door in the morning with a cup of coffee just to say hello and start the day on a friendly note. She'd look at me like I was an intruder, like I'd just broken into her house. The look on her face, it made me feel like a creep. I tried to establish some simple house rules, the kind of things that make a house a home. I asked her to please keep the living room curtains open during the day. It's a dark room, and the sunlight makes it feel so much more cheerful and alive. I also asked if she could just tidy up her things when she was done in the common areas. A coffee mug on the table, a jacket on the chair, no big deal, but it adds up. These weren't demands. I was trying to say, let's both take pride in the space. Let's build a nice home together. She just looked at me with those cold eyes and said no. She said she liked her privacy and didn't want the neighbors looking in. She treated every suggestion like a personal attack. I wasn't her housemate. I was just the landlord she had to put up with. The worst part was the money. It was humiliating. An unexpected car repair came up and it completely wiped me out. I was a few days from payday and I was short $100 for the electric bill. I was sick with worry. I finally got up the nerve to ask her if I could borrow it just for a couple of days. I thought, this is what you do for people you live with. You help each other out. The way she looked at me with this mix of pity and disgust, I've never felt so small in my life. She said no, that she wasn't comfortable with it. It wasn't about the money. I would have paid her back the second my check cleared. It was the message she sent. You are not my family. You are not my friend. You are a problem. A week later, I was stuck on a conference call for work that was running late, and I needed cash for groceries on the way home. I texted her and asked if she could possibly run to the ATM for me with her card, and I'd pay her back for the fee and everything as soon as I got home. It would have taken her 10 minutes. She just replied, no, sorry. No explanation. Just no. She didn't trust me. She saw this desperate old woman and probably thought I was going to drain her account. That refusal stung more than anything. It proved she thought the absolute worst of me. I felt like I was going crazy because sometimes she would do something that seemed kind, but it always felt like it had an edge to it. One day I came home from a double shift, completely exhausted, and she had done my laundry. It was all folded in a basket on the living room couch. I was so touched I almost cried. But then it just sat there. For a whole day. It was this silent monument to her one good deed. I was working all the time. My back was killing me, and I texted her and asked, "Hey, I know you're upstairs. Would you mind just bringing that basket up for me? I'm so tired." She never even replied. The laundry just sat there. It felt passive-aggressive. Like she was saying, I did this one nice thing for you, now you owe me, and I'm not lifting another finger. I was drowning, and she was standing on the side of the pool, watching. I'd call her when she was out sometimes, just to see when she'd be home, just to know there would be another human being in the house with me that night. She told me I was suffocating her. I wasn't trying to suffocate her. I was the one who couldn't breathe. The loneliness was suffocating me, and she was my only lifeline. A lifeline that didn't want to be touched. I couldn't take it anymore. The silence, the rejection, the feeling of being a guest in my own home. I finally hit my breaking point. I sat on my bed, my hands shaking, and I typed out a text. It wasn't an eviction. It wasn't an attack. It was a cry for help. I thought maybe if she thinks she's going to have to move, she'll finally talk to me. Maybe she'll finally ask what's wrong. I wrote, I don't think this is working out. I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart pounding. All I wanted was for her to write back and say, why? Let's talk about it. I just wanted to fix it. I just wanted to feel like I wasn't completely alone. I hit send. And then I waited. Her reply came through a few minutes later. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an offer to talk. It was just 2 words. I agree. That was it. My heart just sank into my stomach. I had held out this little bit of hope that she would see my text for what it was, a desperate plea. Instead, she just slammed the door in my face. There was no fixing this. There was nothing to even talk about. She wanted out. The wall of ice she had built between us was never going to come down. I felt so stupid, so naive. I had imagined a family, and she had just been counting the days until she could get away from me. The next day, she was gone. I came home from work to a house that was quieter than it had ever been. The silence was different this time. It wasn't just lonely, it was angry. Her bedroom door was wide open, and the room was bare. She hadn't just moved out. She had erased herself. And she had done it like a thief in the night, without even the decency of a goodbye. I walked into the living room and flicked the light switch. Nothing. I tried another lamp. Nothing. The power was on, but the TV wouldn't turn on, and my phone wasn't connecting to the internet. I went over to the modem and saw the empty space where it used to be. The lights were blinking on the box, but the cord was gone. She had taken it. She had canceled the Wi-Fi and the cable services that were in her name, sure, but she knew I needed them. I worked from home half the time. How could she be so cruel? To just cut me off from the world like that, without a word of warning. It was a final parting shot designed to hurt me as much as possible. I went to the kitchen to get a drink, and even the ice cube tray was gone from the freezer. It was so petty, so childish. It was all over a disagreement about curtains and asking her to bring my laundry upstairs. The fallout was a complete nightmare. She had left a few things behind a box of old videotapes that had belonged to her dad, she'd once told me. They seemed important. I texted her to come get them. I just wanted this to be over. She refused to come to the house alone. She said she'd only come with a landlord present. She was manipulating the whole situation, painting me as some kind of threat, someone she was afraid of. Me, a 60-year-old woman who just wanted a little companionship. A few days later, she got her way. I was sitting on the back porch, on the phone with my boss, trying desperately to explain why I'd been so distracted and off my game at work. The stress was eating me alive. And then I saw them through the sliding glass door. It was her and the landlord creeping around my house like I was a criminal. She was pointing at things, talking in a low voice. She took him into her old room, which she had, of course, left spotless, probably cleaner than it ever was when she lived there. She was putting on a show, making herself look like the perfect responsible tenant who had escaped a crazy old landlady. The landlord didn't even bother to hear my side of the story. He came out onto the porch, his face set like stone, and handed her back her full security deposit right there in front of me. It was a slap in the face. It was him saying, "I believe her. You're the problem." I just stood there speechless. She took the check, grabbed her box of tapes, and walked out of my life without even looking at me. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. An hour after she left, my boss called me back. He said my performance had been declining for weeks, that they needed someone more focused. He was letting me go. I was fired. On the exact same day that she finalized her escape. She hadn't just moved out. She had detonated a bomb in the middle of my life and walked away without a single scratch deposit in hand. The stress she put me through, the constant feeling of rejection in my own home, the sleepless nights, it all led to this. I lost my roommate, my dignity, and my job all at once. The worst part is what came after. I found out from an old coworker, one of the few who still talks to me, what she's been saying. She's telling everyone I was trying to steal from her. That I'm unstable. She took my loneliness, my desperate attempts to connect, and twisted them into something ugly and scary. She's the victim in her story. The poor young girl who escaped from the clutches of the crazy old woman. She didn't see a lonely person desperate for a family. She saw a mark. She used me for a cheap room, and when my problems, my real human problems, became inconvenient for her, she threw me away and ruined my life in the process. She wasn't just a quiet girl who wanted her privacy. She was cold and calculating. She took the little flicker of hope I had for a life with less silence, and she stomped it out. Now the silence is all I have left. And it's louder than ever.
Story 9.
I'm the woman who cheated. The fiancé. I'm sure you've all heard his side of the story, and I'm sure it makes me sound like a monster, and maybe I am. But you only heard about the ending. You didn't hear about the 3 years before that, about how a person can drown in a perfectly calm, sunlit sea. When we met in college, it was electric. We weren't just two people. We were the center of a huge group of friends. There were parties, late-night study sessions that turned into debates about everything, road trips we decided on at 2 a.m. We were both alive, both loud in our own ways. He was smart and funny and a little shy, which I found so charming. I was the outgoing one, the one who made the plans, and he was my calm center. It worked. It was more than work. It was amazing. The change was slow. I barely noticed it at first. After graduation, he landed a great job in finance, and I moved into his apartment. Not our apartment times his asterisk. That was the first small sign. My life, which had been this sprawling thing with a dozen different friend groups and hobbies, started to shrink. It wasn't anything he said, not directly. It was quieter than that. It was the way he'd look a little hurt if I had plans with my friends on a Friday night. The way he'd say, "Oh, I was hoping we could just stay in." His shyness, the thing I used to love, started to feel like a magnet pulling all of my energy toward him, leaving none for myself. My friends would invite me out, and I'd find myself saying no more and more often, just to avoid that quiet, disappointed look on his face. He never forbade me from doing anything. He was too nice for that. Instead, he'd just make our home so comfortable, so perfect, that going out felt like a betrayal. He loved me. I truly believe that. But it felt like the love someone has for a rare butterfly. He wanted to pin me under glass, to keep me perfect and safe and entirely his. The proposal was the moment the glass case locked. He did it in front of all our friends and family at a barbecue. Everyone was crying and cheering. I smiled and said, "Yes, because what else could I do?" But inside I felt a cold dread. This was it. The final step in becoming Mrs. Perfect, the wife of a great guy living a life that looked flawless from the outside but felt like a cage on the inside. I felt my name, my identity, everything I was before him just dissolving. That's when I started pulling away. He must have noticed. I was quieter. I stopped suggesting things for us to do. I was just there. Every time he called me his fiancée, my stomach twisted. Every time he touched me, it felt less like affection and more like he was checking to make sure his prized possession was still on the shelf. At Thanksgiving that year, my own mom pulled me into the kitchen. She'd seen how quiet I was, how I barely looked at him. She said, "What is wrong with you? He is a wonderful man. You're being cruel." She didn't see that I was suffocating. She just saw that I was failing at my one job, being the perfect happy partner to her perfect future son-in-law. That's when I met Mark at work. He was a mistake, a terrible cliché. He was older, married, and a complete mess. But he was my mistake. It was the first decision I'd made for myself, by myself, in years. He didn't look at me like I was a fragile object. He saw my unhappiness and didn't try to fix it. Being with him was reckless and selfish and wrong, but it was the only time I felt like I was in the driver's seat of my own life. I wasn't his fiancée, I wasn't anyone's daughter. I was just me making a bad choice. And it felt incredible. Then my fiancé got a new project at work. He'd have to travel Monday to Friday for several weeks. When he told me, I pretended to be sad, but honestly it was like someone opened a window in a stuffy room. I could breathe again. The constant feeling of being watched, of being managed, was gone. And in that freedom I fell deeper with Mark. The affair went from emotional to physical. It was wrong, I know that. But it was the only thing that felt real in a life that had become a performance. My fiancé came home one weekend determined to spoil me. He took me to a fancy dinner, bought me jewelry. The whole time it felt like an interrogation disguised as romance. He kept asking if I was happy, if there was anything I wanted to tell him. It was so strange. He wasn't accusing me of anything, but it felt like he knew something was off. He was pushing me to confess, and I could see the whole script play out in my head. I would cry, I would confess, he would be the bigger person and forgive me. And then he would have me back in the box more securely than ever. I couldn't give him that. The next week he called. The big client meeting he was supposed to fly to Barbados for was happening remotely instead. He'd already booked the non-refundable all-inclusive trip. He couldn't go. But he said I should. I should take a friend and go relax on the beach for a week, his treat. It felt so bizarre, so convenient. It was another test. A final exam, asterisk. Go be free and let me see what you do with it. Asterisk. I knew who I was going to ask before he even finished the sentence. Calling Mark was the ultimate act of self-destruction. It was a final, desperate scream telling the world and myself that I would rather burn my perfect life to the ground than let myself disappear inside it. I packed my bags for a week in paradise, a week of bad decisions under the sun. I knew deep down that when I came back, nothing would ever be the same. I just had no idea how right I was. The week in Barbados was a blur of sun, sand, and the hollow feeling of getting exactly what I thought I wanted. Mark was fun, but the closer we got to the flight home, the more I realized he was just an escape route, not a destination. The fantasy was over. Reality was waiting at baggage claim. The moment we landed, something felt wrong. I turned my phone on, but it wouldn't connect to the network. No service. I figured it was just an issue with the airport's reception. Mark dropped me off at the apartment building, a quick, awkward kiss on the cheek before he drove away to his real life, his wife, his own mess. I stood on the sidewalk with my suitcase and suddenly felt incredibly lonely. I knocked on the door to our apartment. A woman I'd never seen before, maybe in her late 40s, opened it. She was holding a toddler. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice friendly but confused. I think you have the wrong apartment," I stammered. "This is 3B. It is," she said, shifting the child on her hip. "We just moved in last week." The world tilted. It felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. I must have looked like a ghost because her husband came to the door. "Is everything okay?" I couldn't speak. I just shook my head and backed away, dragging my suitcase behind me. My hands were shaking as I tried my phone again. Still no service. I borrowed a stranger's phone to call him. A recorded voice answered. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected." Disconnected. Not off, not dead. Disconnected. Panic started crawling up my throat, cold and sharp. I tried to log into our joint bank account app. Invalid login. Every door was slamming shut one by one. I was locked out of my own life. There was only one person left to call. My mom. I expected her to be worried to tell me to get in a cab and come home. But the voice that answered was one I didn't recognize. It was my mother's, but it was flat and cold like a sheet of metal. "Mom!" I cried, relief and fear mixing in my voice. "Something's wrong." "The apartment, the phone." "I know," she said. There was no warmth, no sympathy. "What do you mean, you know? Where is he?" There was a long pause. "He was here," she said, her voice like ice. "He came 2 days ago. He dropped off your things." The words didn't make sense. Dropped off my things. I pictured a few bags, some clothes. What things, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Everything, Sarah, all of it. Your clothes, your books, your furniture. Your entire life is in boxes in my garage." He had done it. While I was in Barbados, he had come to the apartment we shared, and he had packed up every single trace of me. He had emptied my drawers, my closet, my side of the bathroom cabinet. He had taken down my pictures. He had ended the lease, closed the accounts, changed his number, and moved out. And then he drove 600 miles to my mother's house and delivered my boxed-up life to her doorstep. He told me everything, my mom continued, her voice gaining a sharp, bitter edge. About your coworker, about Barbados. While he was working himself to the bone for you, for your future. In one single calculated move, he hadn't just left me. He had erased me. He dismantled our life brick by brick, and then he poisoned the last safe harbor I had. He turned my own mother against me without me even being there to defend myself. He didn't scream at me, he didn't confront me. He never gave me the chance to explain or to apologize or to fight. He just deleted me. Quietly. Efficiently. Completely. I finally made it to my mother's house. It was even worse than I imagined. The garage was filled with brown cardboard boxes. My name was written on each one in his neat, perfect handwriting. It looked like evidence from a crime scene. Inside, my mother was a storm of silent rage. Her coldness finally broke, but not in the way I needed. She told me my father had moved out. He'd also been having an affair. The irony was suffocating. My own mother was facing the exact same betrayal, and instead of bringing us together, it made her look at me with pure disgust, like I was the same disease that had ruined her own life. I spent the next few weeks living in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the boxed-up remains of my adult life. I tried to find him, to talk to him, but he was a ghost. He had disappeared from social media. Our mutual friends wouldn't answer my calls. He had executed his plan with chilling precision. And that's when I finally understood. The shy, quiet, loving man I was engaged to was a character he played. The real man was underneath. Someone cold, methodical, and more controlling than I ever could have imagined. His love wasn't the warm, forgiving kind. It was the love of a curator for his collection. He wanted me to be perfect, to sit on his shelf and be admired. The second I showed a crack, the second I wasn't the perfect piece he had chosen, I wasn't worth fixing. I was just broken. And you don't fix broken things. You throw them away. He didn't get angry because he wasn't heartbroken. He was just inconvenienced. His perfect life plan had a flaw, and he corrected it by cutting out the flawed part, me. I did a terrible thing, and I will live with that forever. But his response wasn't that of a man in pain. It was the response of a manager firing a bad employee. He didn't want a partner. He wanted an object. And when the object misbehaved, he simply packed it up and returned it to where it came from.
Story Teen.
I am writing this because I don't know what else to do. My only son, my beautiful boy, has cut me out of his life. He sent a message that said we are dead to him and to never contact him again. My husband is broken, and I feel like my heart has been ripped out of my chest. And why? Because we love him. Because we wanted him to have a happy life. I need to tell someone what happened because he will tell the story and make us sound like monsters. But we only ever did it for him. My son Ajay was always a good boy. He was smart, he listened to us, and he made us so proud. He got his master's degree, found a wonderful job in the city, and bought his own home. We gave him everything, and he worked so hard. He was on the perfect path. Then the accident happened. He was just a few years out of college. A terrible car crash. We almost lost him. For weeks we sat by his hospital bed praying to God to save our only child. And he did. Ajay survived. He healed physically, but something inside him broke that day. He became quiet, distant. He stopped talking about the future, about finding a good wife and starting a family. When we would bring it up, he would get angry. He started saying this strange Western nonsense he read on the internet. He said he wanted to be child-free. He said a family was a trap and he wanted to be free to explore. Explore what? A lonely life. An empty house when he is 50. We tried to talk sense into him. A man's life is not complete without a family. Who will carry on his name? Who will be there for him when he is old and frail like we are getting now? His ideas were foolishness, a phase brought on by the trauma of his accident. But he wouldn't listen. We saw him walking toward a future of regret and loneliness, and as his parents, we could not just stand by and watch. It is our duty to guide him even when he doesn't see the path clearly. That's when we thought of Anjali. She is the daughter of a very old family friend. A lovely girl, so respectful and kind. She was raised with proper values. She understood that the greatest joy in life is family. We arranged for them to meet, and it was perfect. Ajay was charmed by her. He started smiling again, a real smile for the first time since the accident. They started seeing each other. We were so happy. Of course, he told her his strange ideas about not wanting children. I was worried it would scare her away. But Anjali is a smart girl. She just listened calmly and told him she understood. She agreed with him. I spoke to her mother later, and we both knew what she was doing. She was being agreeable, a very good quality in a wife. She was giving him time. Of course, she wanted children. All good women do. She was just being patient, letting him feel like he was in control. We knew that once they were married, once he held his own child in his arms, all this child-free nonsense would disappear like a bad dream. We just needed to help him get there. But he was taking too long. Months went by. He was seeing her, he liked her, but he was dragging his feet. He wouldn't commit. He was going to let this perfect, wonderful girl slip away because of his immature fantasies. Her parents were getting worried, and so were we. We met with them for dinner one night, and we all had the same fear. Our children's happiness was at stake. We all agreed that Ajay just needed a push. A reason to do the right thing and stop overthinking everything. The plan was simple. It was born from love, from desperation to see our son happy. We decided that after they were finally intimate, we would announce the blessing of a child. It was a small lie, yes, but for a greater truth. The truth of a family. The truth of a legacy. A baby would force him to face his responsibilities. It would make him propose to Anjali and settle down. Once they were married and he was a proper husband, a real baby would come in time. No one would ever have to know. It was a good plan. A plan to save him from himself. We just had to wait. A few weeks later, Anjali's mother called me, her voice full of excitement. It had happened. Ajay and Anjali had been together. It was time. My heart was pounding. Finally, our son's real life was about to begin. I was so happy for him, for all of us. I pictured their wedding my first grandchild. I waited an hour and then I called him, my voice shaking with joy. I was ready to celebrate the good news with him. But his reaction, it wasn't what I expected. He was quiet on the phone. Pregnant, he asked, and his voice was flat. There was no joy, no excitement, not even surprise, really. It was cold. Suspicious. How do you know? He asked. I told him Anjali had told her mother, and her mother had told us that we were all so thrilled. He just said, okay, and hung up. He didn't sound like a man who was about to become a father. He sounded like an animal caught in a trap. My stomach felt heavy, but I told myself he was just in shock. It was big news. He would come around. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Anjali, and she was crying. He called me, she sobbed. He wants me to come to his house right now. He sounds so angry. I think he knows. My blood ran cold. How could he know? It was impossible. He was just scared. I told her to be strong. I told her we would not let him ruin this. I called her parents, and my husband and I got in the car. We would all go together. We would stand with Anjali and show Ajay what a family does. We support each other. We would talk to him, calm him down, and make him see reason. He was just panicking. He needed his parents to guide him. When we pulled up to his house, Anjali's parents were already there waiting on the sidewalk. We all walked to the door together, a united front. I knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Ajay stood there, but he looked like a stranger. There was no panic on his face. Just a quiet, terrible rage. His eyes were cold. He looked at Anjali, then at her parents, then his eyes landed on me and his father. He held up his phone in his hand, then slowly lowered it. "Come in," he said. His voice was empty. "All of you, let's talk." We walked into his living room. The air was thick and heavy, like right before a thunderstorm. No one sat down. My husband Ever, the peacemaker, tried to speak first. "Son, what is this? Why have you called us all here?" Ajay didn't look at him. He held up a hand and my husband fell silent. He looked only at Anjali. "I have one question for you," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Are you pregnant with my child?" Anjali looked at me then, her mother, her eyes wide with fear. She nodded weakly. "Yes," she whispered. "I see," Ajay said. He didn't raise his voice. He just walked over to his coffee table. On it was a small rectangular box, a pregnancy test he must have bought from the pharmacy. He pushed it across the table toward her. "Then you won't mind proving it. The bathroom is down the hall. We can all wait." Anjali started to cry. Her father exploded. "How dare you? You disrespect my daughter. You shame her in your home." My husband started shouting too, telling Ajay that this was madness, that he had gone too far. I tried to rush to Anjali's side to comfort her, but Ajay stepped in my way. "This is between me and her," he said, his eyes like chips of ice. "Let her answer." But we all knew she couldn't. The whole room knew. Anjali broke down, completely sobbing that she couldn't do it. "It's not true," she cried, looking at Ajay with begging eyes. "It's not true. They made me do it, your parents and my parents. They said it was the only way. They said you would never commit." The shouting stopped. The only sound was Anjali's desperate crying. The room was frozen. I looked at my son, and the man I saw was not the boy I raised. The quiet rage on his face had been replaced by something else, something I had never seen before. A look of complete and total betrayal. He looked at me, at his father, then at Anjali's parents, as if seeing us all for the first time, and he was disgusted by what he saw. Then he started to laugh. It was not a happy sound. It was a horrible, broken sound that echoed in the silent room. "You did this," he said, his voice cracking. "All of you, you sat in a room together and planned this to trap me?" I found my voice. I had to make him understand. "Ajay Beta, listen to me," I pleaded, stepping toward him. "We did it because we love you. We want you to be happy. We wanted to give you a family, a future." "This isn't love," he roared, and the force of it made me jump back. "This is control. This is you deciding you know my life better than I do. This is a lie." He turned to Anjali's parents, his face twisted with fury. "Get her out of my house. Get out. Now." They didn't need to be told twice. Anjali's father grabbed her arm and practically dragged his crying daughter out the door without another word. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving just the three of us. For a moment, all the anger seemed to drain out of him. He looked at us, his shoulders slumped, and I saw tears welling in his eyes. He looked so lost, so hurt. He looked like my little boy again, the one who would run to me, scrape knee. My heart ached. Maybe now he would see. "We just didn't want you to be alone," I whispered. It was the wrong thing to say. The rage came back hotter and more terrible than before. He started yelling in our language, using words that no son should ever use to his mother, to his father. Words that felt like physical blows. He said we never cared about him, only about what the community thought. Only about having grandchildren to carry on a name he didn't even care about. He said we saw his pain after the accident not as something to heal, but as a problem to be fixed with a wife and a baby. "I survived a car crash that should have killed me," he screamed, tears streaming down his face now. "I survived, and I've been trying to figure out how to live, and you couldn't wait for me to do that. You had to force me onto your path because you were afraid." "We times are times afraid for you," my husband shouted back. "This is what parents do." "No," Ajay pointed a shaking finger at the front door. "Get out of my house. Both of you, get out." He threw us out. His own parents. He opened the door and stood there while we walked out, not saying another word. We stood on his driveway, the home we helped him buy, and the door closed. We were left outside like strangers. The drive home was silent. My husband's hands were white on the steering wheel. I kept checking my phone, praying he would call, that his anger would pass, and he would realize we only meant well. An hour after we got home, my phone buzzed. It was a message from him. It was short. It said times, "As far as I'm concerned, my parents died in that car accident with a part of me that used to trust them. Don't call. Don't write. We are done. Don't contact me on my wedding day, if I have one, or on your deathbeds. You are dead to me." Asterisk. I read it once. Twice. A third time. The words wouldn't make sense. My heart didn't just break. It turned to dust. I showed the phone to my husband, and he let out a sound of such pain that I will never forget it. This is what we get for loving our son too much. For wanting to protect him from a future of loneliness. We built a beautiful plan to give him a happy life. And with a few angry words, he tore it all down. He chose his selfish ideas and his empty freedom over his own family. People will hear his side of the story and call us monsters. But a parent's love is a fierce, desperate thing. We saw our child walking toward a cliff, and we did what we had to do to pull him back. We didn't fail. He did. He failed to understand. And now we are the ones who are alone.
Story 11.
I'm probably the bad guy in my husband's story. I know I am. The wife who wanted an open marriage and then couldn't handle it when he found someone. It's an easy story to tell, and it makes me sound awful. Maybe I am. But it wasn't that simple, and I just need to explain my side. Just once. I loved my husband. I still do, in a way that feels like a phantom limb, an ache for something that isn't there anymore. He was my first boyfriend, my first everything. We met when we were 19, got married at 24. For a decade, my world was just him. He was my best friend, my family, my entire social circle. And for a long time, that was more than enough. It was perfect. Our life was comfortable, quiet, and safe. But then I got a new job. It was my first time working in a real office environment with a team. Mostly women. And they would talk. Over lunch, they'd tell stories about their lives before they were married or about their crazy dating experiences. They had stories about backpacking through Europe, disastrous one-night stands, messy breakups, finding themselves in a new city. They had lived. I'd just sit there smiling and nodding with nothing to add. What was my story? I met a boy, fell in love, and that was it. The end. When they talked, I felt this awful burning jealousy. It felt like they were all whole people and I was just one half of a couple. My identity was his wife. That was it. I felt like my world, which was supposed to get bigger as I got older, had shrunk to the size of our 2-bedroom apartment. My new manager, Mark, was the first person who seemed to see times me asterisk. Not the wife, not part of a pair, but just me. He'd ask for my opinion in meetings and actually listen. He'd laugh at my dumb jokes. He told me I was sharp and had potential. He made me feel interesting. It started with lunches with the team, then just coffee with him to talk about work projects. It was innocent, but it felt like a window had been thrown open in a room I didn't even realize was stuffy. The idea of an open marriage came from my new friends. They talked about it like it was this modern, enlightened way to be. A way to have security and also freedom. The idea got stuck in my head. I didn't want to leave my husband. The thought of that was impossible. But I wanted my own stories. I wanted to feel desired and interesting, to have a little bit of the wild phase I never got. I convinced myself it wasn't about destroying what we had. It was about times adding times to it. If I could just get this out of my system, I'd be a better, happier, more complete wife for him. It was a stupid, selfish fantasy, but I believed it. I thought I'd found a loophole. When I brought it up to him, he was floored. He said, "Aren't you happy? Am I not enough?" I tried to explain it wasn't about him. It was about me. About my feeling of being incomplete, of having missed out. I sold it as an adventure we could both have. He was reluctant, so reluctant. It took weeks of convincing. I hate myself for this, but I pushed him. I made him feel like he was being old-fashioned, like he was holding me back. Eventually broken down, he agreed. The thing with Mark started almost immediately. It was exactly like I imagined. The secret texts, the stolen moments after work, the feeling of being wanted by someone new. It was a rush. I was finally collecting stories. This was my adventure. I felt alive, and I told myself that this excitement was what I'd bring back to my marriage. I knew my husband was going on dates. I was the one who encouraged it. It's only fair, I'd say, trying to sound breezy and cool. He'd tell me he was going out, and I'd say, "Have fun and mean it." Or I thought I did. It was all an idea in my head. A concept. I wasn't there, I didn't see it, so it didn't feel real. He'd come home and I wouldn't ask questions. He didn't seem very happy about it anyway at first. It just reinforced my belief that this was my thing and he was just playing along to humor me. Then after a few months, something changed. He stopped looking so sad when he would go out. He started coming home later. I noticed him smiling at his phone, a soft, private smile that I hadn't seen in years. A smile that I wasn't the cause of. He had a new lightness to him. He started humming in the kitchen again. He seemed happy. Genuinely, truly happy. And I had absolutely nothing to do with it. He told me about her. He was honest, just like we agreed to be. Her name was Sarah. He said it was getting serious. The word serious hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't supposed to be serious. This was supposed to be a game, a phase. A collection of stories. She wasn't just a date anymore. He called her his girlfriend to me once. Girlfriend? The word felt like acid in my mouth. The theoretical fairness of our arrangement suddenly became a horrifying reality. This woman was real. She was making my husband laugh. She was putting that light back in his eyes. The adventure I wanted had unleashed something I couldn't control, and it was now eating my husband's heart. The pit in my stomach became a permanent resident. The fun was over. The game was real. One Saturday, he was getting ready to go out. He was dressed up wearing the shirt I bought him for his birthday. He looked handsome, and he was practically vibrating with excitement. He was going to meet her parents. The words hung in the air between us. Meeting her parents. That wasn't part of the deal. That wasn't a casual story. That was a life, a different life. As he turned to leave, he glanced back at me, and his smile was so bright, so full of a joy that had nothing to do with me. In that moment, watching him walk out the door to go build a world with someone else, I realized I hadn't found a loophole. I had signed an eviction notice for my own heart. The door clicked shut, and the silence in our apartment was suddenly deafening. He was gone. Gone to meet her parents. The thought repeated in my head each time, a little louder, a little more hysterical. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't an experience. He was building a life, and I had handed him the hammer and nails. I sank onto the sofa, the same sofa where I had convinced him this was a good idea, and felt the full weight of my stupidity crush me. The next few days were a blur of panic. I tried calling one of my work friends, the one who was the biggest cheerleader for this whole mess. I was crying, trying to explain that this had gone too far, that he was slipping away. She was quiet for a moment, and then said with a kind of casual cruelty, "Well, from what you've said, it looks like his lover makes him happy." Isn't that what you wanted? The line went dead in my ears. The spell was broken. I wasn't a modern woman on an adventure. I was the fool who'd sent her own husband into the arms of another woman. That was it. I decided I was going to fix it. I was going to win him back. I went into overdrive. I cleaned the entire apartment until it gleamed. I cooked his favorite meals, the complicated ones I hadn't made in years. I'd wait up for him wearing something nice, trying to be the fun, affectionate wife he'd married. But I was trying to patch a sinking ship with masking tape. He was polite but distant. He'd thank me for dinner and then retreat to his phone, a small, sad smile on his face, as he texted her. He was living in our home, but his heart had already moved out. The breaking point came about a week later. He came home from a night with Sarah, and I was waiting for him. I couldn't take it anymore. "We have to stop this," I said, my voice shaking. "I want to close the marriage. Now." He looked at me, his face tired. "You can't just do that. It's not a game you can just declare over when you're losing." "I'm not losing," I shot back, my voice getting louder. "I'm choosing us. I choose our marriage." "You chose this," he said quietly. "You pushed for this. This isn't just about you anymore. There are other people involved. Sarah. She's a real person." Hearing him defend her, defend their relationship, was like a physical blow. She was supposed to be a fling, just like Mark was for me. He laughed a bitter, hollow sound. "Like Mark. Don't even compare the two." He walked past me into the kitchen, and I followed him. What's that supposed to mean? He turned around, and for the first time in months, I saw real fire in his eyes. Not sadness, but pure cutting anger. I came by your office to surprise you for lunch last week. I was standing outside the door. I heard you on the phone with him. I heard him say that you were a pleasant distraction while his fiancée was out of town. The world tilted. Engaged. His fiancée. The words didn't make sense. Mark had never mentioned a fiancée. My adventure, my story, the thing I had risked my entire world for. I wasn't an explorer. I was a side piece. A fool's disposable thrill. All the air left my lungs. My desperate attempt to fix us to be the perfect wife was built on the foundation of a pathetic lie I had told myself. I saw it all with horrible clarity. He saw the look on my face, and his anger just dissolved, replaced by a deep, weary pity. That was worse. I want us back, I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. I'll do anything. He just shook his head slowly. The us you want is gone. You burned it down for him. The unfairness of it all, the shame it all boiled over into a scream. What does she give you that I can't? It wasn't really a question. It was the howl of an animal caught in a trap of its own making. He looked at me, his eyes empty of the love that used to be there. All I saw was a hollowed-out space. She never made me feel like I wasn't enough. We started marriage counseling after that. I thought if I could just lay all the ugly truth out, he would see how sorry I was and we could rebuild from the wreckage. In that sterile little office, the confessions poured out of me. I told him everything. How insecure I was, how my friends and Mark had influenced me, how I'd used the open marriage as a shortcut to feel special. I cried and I begged. He just sat there nodding. His eyes were numb. He was listening to the facts of a case that was already closed. The love wasn't there anymore. I tried to undo the damage. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't stand to be in that building to see Mark's face. I later heard he was fired after I anonymously forwarded some of his inappropriate messages to HR, along with a tip that he was having an affair while engaged to another woman in a senior position. I cut off the friends who had filled my head with all those stupid ideas. I deleted their numbers, blocked them on everything. I was trying to kill the person I had become, hoping the old me was still underneath somewhere. It didn't matter. 2 weeks later, he told me he was moving out. He'd found an apartment. He packed his things on a Saturday the same way you'd pack for a business trip. Methodical, quiet, efficient. I just stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching him fold the shirts I'd bought him, the life we'd built together, being sorted into cardboard boxes. When he was done, he walked to the door. I didn't try to stop him. There was nothing left to say. He looked at me one last time with a kind of final, exhausted sadness. "Goodbye," he said, and then he was gone. Now I'm here in our apartment that is now just my apartment. It's quiet all the time. I have so many stories now. I have the story of how I convinced my husband to let me sleep with my boss. I have the story of how that boss was an engaged liar. I have the story of watching my husband fall in love with another woman. And I have the story of how I stood by and did nothing while he packed up our life and walked out the door forever. I wanted to feel like a whole person. I thought new experiences would complete me. But all I did was trade a kingdom for a handful of cheap trinkets. And now I'm standing in the ruins, completely and utterly bankrupt. I got my stories. I just wish I had someone to tell them to.
Story 12.
I know how I look in this story. I'm the villain. The mean girl. The one who made his life hell for no good reason. And I'm not here to say I wasn't. I was. I was a monster to him. But I need you to understand that monsters aren't born, they're made. And high school was my monster factory. You have to picture it. It wasn't like the movies where the popular kids are untouchable gods. It was more like a Roman Colosseum. Every day you walked in and you were either a spectator or you were on the sand. My friends and I, we were the lead performers, the gladiators. But the crowd was also us. We were all watching each other all the time, waiting for one wrong move, one sign of weakness. Being popular wasn't about being liked. It was about being feared just enough that no one would turn on you. My friends were my audience and my jailers. Every joke I made, every person I complimented or insulted was judged. A laugh meant I was safe for another day. Silence meant I was losing my touch, maybe I was next. It was a constant buzzing anxiety that lived under my skin. I had to perform day in and day out to keep my spot at the top of that toxic pyramid. And then there was him. He was the easiest target. He was quiet, kept to himself, and had this intensity about him that I just didn't understand. He wasn't like the other guys who were loud and dumb. He was just there, watching. It scared me. My teenage brain, which was a dumpster fire of insecurity and a desperate need to be liked, couldn't handle that. It twisted that feeling of being intimidated into something ugly. I decided he was weird, a freak, and I made it my mission to make everyone else see it too. The teasing started small. A nickname here, a joke in the hallway there. It was all a desperate attempt to get a reaction from him, and more importantly, a reaction from my friends. Every time they laughed, it was like a drug. It told me I was okay. I was still one of them. I was still safe. I'd go home and feel this disgusting pit in my stomach, hating the things I'd said, hating the person I was pretending to be. But the next morning, the fear of being alone, of being the one everyone pointed at, was always stronger than the guilt. I was more scared of becoming him than I was of hurting him. The catfishing prank was the grand finale of my cruelty. It was born from a bored Tuesday afternoon in the cafeteria. One of my friends thought it would be hysterical. A master performance. We'd make a fake profile of a girl, get him interested, and then have him meet up with another guy from school who we were also messing with. It was supposed to be the ultimate joke. I went along with it, pouring all my nervous energy into the performance, telling myself it was all just for a laugh. No one was really getting hurt. The day we set for them to meet, we all hid in the bushes by the park entrance like the pathetic cowards we were. I remember my stomach churning a mix of excitement and a deep, deep feeling that this was wrong. Then they both showed up. I saw him walk up, looking around, a little nervous, but also hopeful. And then the other boy arrived. The confusion on their faces, the slow, dawning horror of what was happening. It wasn't funny. It was devastating. The look on his face broke something in me. For the first time, I didn't see a target or a joke. I saw a person. A person I had systematically, deliberately, and cruelly crushed just to make a few shallow girls laugh. The laughter from my friends sounded like nails on a chalkboard. I felt sick. I wanted to run out there and apologize, take it all back, but I was frozen. I just watched as they both walked away, completely humiliated. The real payment for my actions came a few weeks later. The fallout from the prank had been messy, and the other boy involved had taken a lot of heat for it. I was walking to my car after volleyball practice, and he cornered me in the empty parking lot. I opened my mouth to say something, maybe make a joke or tell him to get lost, but I never got the chance. He didn't say a single word. He just punched me. The world exploded into white, searing pain. I felt a crack in my jaw, a disgusting wet sound that was louder than the hit itself. I stumbled back against a car and he kicked me in the side hard. I heard another crack. The air was gone from my lungs. I crumpled to the pavement, gasping, unable to breathe, tasting blood. The physical pain was unbelievable, but it was the terror that truly broke me. In that moment, I understood. My harmless jokes weren't harmless. My words, my stupid performances, they had real physical, violent consequences. He just stared down at me for a second before turning and walking away, leaving me a heap on the asphalt. A fractured jaw and 2 broken ribs. That was the official price. The unofficial price was fear. I lived in it for the rest of high school. I didn't just forget he existed after that. I actively ran from him. Every time I saw him in the hall, my heart would pound in my chest. I was terrified of him. Not because I thought he would hurt me, I knew he wouldn't. He wasn't like that, but because when I looked at him, I saw what I had done. I saw the cruelty and the consequences all at once. He was a ghost, and I spent years running from him. And then, 10 years later, I saw him at a Wendy's. I was on my lunch break scrolling on my phone, waiting for my spicy chicken sandwich. I looked up, and there he was. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a man standing tall and calm in a police officer's uniform, ordering a Frosty. All the shame, the guilt, the fear I had buried for a decade came rushing back so fast, it almost knocked me over. My heart was in my throat. He hadn't seen me yet. I could have just walked away, left him to his ice cream, and gone back to running. But I didn't. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't run. I threw my trash away, took a deep breath that didn't feel deep enough, and walked over to him. My brain was screaming at me. What was I going to say? Hey, remember me, I'm the girl who systematically destroyed your self-esteem for sport. Want to get fries? It was insane. He looked up as I approached, and his face was completely blank. No recognition. For a split second, that hurt, which was the most ridiculous feeling I've ever had. Then a flicker. He knew. His posture changed, became more guarded. He didn't look scared, just wary. Like he was assessing a threat, which I guess I was. "Hi," I managed to squeak out. My voice sounded small. He just nodded. "Hey." Words failed me. All my carefully constructed adult confidence vanished. I was 16 again, standing in front of the boy whose life I'd made a joke. So I did something stupid, something impulsive. I kind of lunged forward and gave him a hug. It was stiff and awkward and probably lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. I pulled back, my face burning. "I'm so sorry," I blurted out. "For everything." He just stared at me. I could see him processing it, running through a mental file of every rotten thing I'd ever done. I deserved whatever he was about to say. I deserved for him to tell me to get lost. "It was a long time ago," he said finally. His voice was calm, deeper than I remembered. Can I get your number? I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I just want to talk. To explain. If you don't want to, I totally get it. He was quiet for a long moment. I was sure he was going to say no. I was already planning my walk of shame back to my car. But then he pulled out his phone and read his number out to me. I fumbled to type it into my contacts, my hands shaking. I thanked him, turned, and practically fled the restaurant. For 2 days, I stared at that number in my phone. I wrote and deleted at least 50 different opening texts. How do you start that conversation? I was completely paralyzed by fear. So I did something a little crazy. I looked up his older sister on Facebook. We'd been in some of the same clubs in high school, and I remembered her being nice. I sent her a message, my heart pounding, and asked how he was doing and if he was seeing anyone. It felt like stalking, but I had to know if I was about to open up this can of worms, only to find out he was happily married. She replied a few hours later. She was cautious, but she said he was single, doing well, and that he'd mentioned a weird girl from high school had hugged him at Wendy's. She said he seemed more confused than angry. That gave me the tiny sliver of courage I needed. I texted him. I asked if he'd be willing to meet me for lunch, my treat. I made it clear it wasn't a date. I called it a chance for me to give a long overdue apology. He agreed. Walking into that restaurant was harder than walking into the DMV, the dentist, and a job interview combined. He was already there in a booth, in civilian clothes this time. He looked like a normal guy. It was almost jarring. I slid into the seat opposite him and the silence was suffocating. We ordered and I just sat there, my hands clasped on the table, waiting for the trial to begin. He was the one who broke the silence after the waitress left. "Okay," he said, looking right at me. "I'll bite." What? It wasn't angry. It was just a genuine question. And the truth, the whole disgusting, pathetic truth, just came pouring out of me. I told him about the Coliseum, about my so-called friends, about the constant fear and the pressure to perform. I told him how my own insecurity made me see his quietness as a threat. I didn't try to make excuses. I owned every terrible note, every whispered insult, every part I played in the prank. Then I took a deep breath and told him the part I'd never told anyone else. A few weeks after the park, I said, my voice shaking a little, the other boy in the prank. He cornered me after practice. He broke my jaw and 2 of my ribs. His eyes widened just slightly. It was the first real crack in his neutral expression. "I'm not telling you that for pity," I said quickly, looking him straight in the eye. "I'm telling you because that's when I understood. When I was lying on the pavement, unable to breathe, I finally got it. What I did wasn't a joke. It had consequences. After that, I was terrified of you. Not because I thought you'd hurt me, but because every time I saw you, you were a reminder of the horrible person I was and the pain I'd caused. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. There's no excuse for it." I finished, my chest heaving completely, expecting him to get up and leave. I had laid all my cards on the table. The monster I had been was right there, sitting in the open. But he didn't leave. He just sat there listening. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said quietly. "Nobody deserves that." And that was it. No yelling, No telling me I got what I deserved. Just acknowledgement. In that moment, something shifted. The monster I'd been felt a little smaller. The ghost I'd been running from for a decade turned back into a person. A person who was showing me more grace than I had ever earned. We finished lunch. We talked about our jobs, our families, all the boring adult stuff. It was awkward, but it was real. When we left, he said, "So that was the apology. What about a real first date?" I was floored. I agreed immediately. He chose bowling. It was perfect. It was loud and a little goofy with no room for heavy silences. I insisted on paying for everything, the lanes, the disgusting shoes, the pitcher of beer. It was a small thing, but it was important to me. He argued for a minute, then smiled and let me. For the first time, I wasn't performing. I wasn't the queen bee or the terrified gladiator. I bowled terribly. I laughed so hard, beer came out of my nose. I was just me. And he was just him. He had a great laugh. I'd never heard it before. We made plans for a second date and a third. It's still new, and it's weird, and we have a history that most people would run from. I know that telling you all of this doesn't make me the hero of the story. I'm not. I was the villain, and nothing will ever change the things I did. But what I'm learning is that maybe, just maybe, your story doesn't have to end the same way it began. Maybe you get a second act. And maybe if you're incredibly lucky, you get to have it with the person you wronged the most, not because you've earned their forgiveness, but because they are kind enough to offer it anyway.
Story 13.
I know what you probably think of me. You've probably read my husband's version of the story. I'm the cheating wife, the monster who blew up 2 families. And I'm not here to say I'm innocent. What I did was wrong. But the story you heard isn't the whole story. It's the neat, clean version where he's the victim and I'm the villain. The truth is so much messier than that. From the outside, we had everything. A beautiful house and a nice neighborhood, 2 great kids, and a social life people would kill for. Our best friends lived just down the street. It was my husband and me, and him and his wife. The 4 of us. We did everything together, holidays, barbecues, family vacations. We were that perfect happy foursome you see in commercials. People told us all the time how lucky we were. But inside our house, when the guests left and the kids were asleep, there was just silence. A huge, empty quiet. My husband is a good man. I need you to understand that. He's a wonderful father and a great provider. He fixed things around the house. He made sure the bills were paid. He bought me a reliable car. He did all the things a husband is supposed to do. But somewhere along the line, he stopped seeing me. I wasn't a person to him anymore. I was a project he had completed. The wife was secured, the kids were healthy, the house was running smoothly. Check, check, check. He could move on to his hobbies. Our conversations became transactions. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? Can you take a look at the dishwasher? It's making a weird noise. Parent-teacher conferences are on Thursday. I would try to talk about my day, about my work, and he'd nod along his eyes, already drifting back to his phone or the TV. He'd say, "That's great, honey," but if I asked him a question about what I just said, he wouldn't have a clue. My job was the only place I felt like myself. I work for the school district in administration. It's not glamorous, but I love it. I believe in public education, in making things better for the kids in our community. I was good at it too. I was passionate and driven, and I was on track for a huge promotion, a director position I had been working towards my entire career. My husband was supportive in the way you support a kid's soccer league. He was proud, but he didn't get it. He didn't understand the late nights, the policy debates, the fire in my belly to fix a broken system. His best friend did. Let's call him Mark. Mark was on the Board of Education. He was just as passionate as I was. He saw the same problems I saw from a different angle. Our kids were friends, our wives were friends, we were all one big, happy family. At first, our texts were just about work. Did you see the latest proposal on the funding gap? What are your thoughts on the new curriculum standards? It was innocent, but it was also like a drug. For the first time in almost a decade, someone was talking to my brain. Someone saw me as a smart, capable professional, not just a mom who coordinates carpools. The texts became more frequent. Hundreds a day. My husband wasn't wrong about that. They started in the morning and ended late at night. We'd be at a family dinner, the four of us, and he and I would be texting under the table about something that happened at a committee meeting. It was our secret world, a place where I felt smart and funny and seen. I felt alive. I wish I could tell you there was a specific moment when the line was crossed, a single decision that I could point to and say, that's where I went wrong. But it wasn't like that. It was a slow, agonizing slide. It was a conversation that went a little too late. A shared look across the dinner table that lasted a little too long. It was the crushing loneliness in my own bed, knowing that just a few houses away was someone who actually understood me. The affair wasn't about sex. It was about turning to the only person who was offering a hand when I felt like I was drowning. The guilt was immediate and suffocating. We were destroying everything. We knew it. We weren't monsters who didn't care. We were two people who had made a terrible mistake and were terrified of the consequences. We loved our spouses not in the way we should have maybe, but we still cared for them as the parents of our children, as people we had built lives with. We couldn't stand the thought of hurting them, of shattering our kids' worlds. That's why we started seeing a therapist together. My husband found the emails about our appointments and assumed the worst, that we were plotting our grand escape. The truth is, we went there because we were lost. We sat on that couch and asked a stranger, how do we fix this? How do we tell the truth in a way that causes the least amount of pain? Our plan wasn't to come up with some other reason to divorce. It was to find the strength to confess and to manage the explosion we knew was coming. We were trying so stupidly to do the wrong thing the right way. We were still trying to figure it out when my husband confronted me. I came home from work one evening and he was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. He just looked at me. There was no sadness in his eyes, no tears, just a coldness I had never seen before. It was sharp and calculating. He said, I know. I read your emails. My world stopped. I started to cry, to apologize, but he held up a hand to stop me. He wasn't interested in my tears. He told me he'd gotten a call from a furious friend of his, someone who knew both of us, who had found out about the affair. He said this friend was disgusted and was planning to go to the next public Board of Education meeting and expose everything. My affair with Mark, a sitting board member. My name, my job, my pending promotion, all of it aired out for the whole town to see. The panic that hit me was unlike anything I've ever felt. It was pure, ice-cold terror. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was my career. My entire professional life, everything I had worked for since I was 22, was about to be burned to the ground in a public spectacle. I called Mark sobbing, barely able to get the words out. He was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, and then he said he would handle it. He said he wouldn't let them destroy me. A few hours later, he called me back. He had gone straight to the superintendent and the board president. He confessed to everything and resigned his position, effective immediately. He thought by getting ahead of it, by controlling the story, he could save my career. He thought he was falling on his sword to protect me. He was a hero. In his own mind and in the eyes of his wife and the few people who knew the real story, he'd done the noble thing. He'd sacrificed his reputation to save mine. But it didn't work. The very next morning, I got a call from my boss, the superintendent. I could hear the pain in her voice. She was a friend, someone I'd worked with for years. She told me she was sorry, so deeply sorry, but with Mark's public resignation citing an inappropriate relationship with a district employee, there was no way the board could approve my promotion. It was over. Just like that. The job I had spent a decade working towards was gone. The days that followed were a blur of shame and chaos. News travels fast in a small town. Even though Mark never used my name, people connected the dots. I had been his biggest champion in the district, the front-runner for a job he would have had to approve. Whispers followed me in the grocery store. Parents at my kids' school would stop talking when I walked up. Mark's wife, my friend, left him. She called me once, her voice raw with a kind of grief I couldn't even imagine, and just said, "How could you?" before hanging up. Our perfect foursome was a pile of rubble. Through it all, my husband was quiet. He watched me fall apart with a strange detachment. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't crying. He just moved around the house like a ghost, his presence a constant cold weight. I thought he was in shock, processing his own pain. I kept trying to apologize, to explain, but he'd just shake his head and walk away. He was letting the consequences of my actions wash over me, letting me drown in the mess I had made. I thought it was his way of coping, of letting me feel the full impact of what I'd done to him. I was so wrong. About a month later, the storm had passed, leaving behind a dead, silent landscape. Mark had moved out of his house. The for sale sign in their yard was a daily reminder of the lives I'd ruined. I was still going to work, but my job felt hollow. I was a pariah. At home, my husband and I barely spoke. We were just two people sharing a mortgage, navigating around each other in the kitchen. One night, I was cleaning up after dinner, and he was sitting at the table, scrolling on his phone just like he always used to. The silence was suffocating me. I finally just said, "Are we ever going to talk about this? About us? What happens now?" He looked up from his phone, his expression completely blank. "What's there to talk about?" he said. Everything I said, my voice cracking. I know I destroyed everything. I hate myself for it. But the way you found out, that friend who was going to expose us, it was horrible, but maybe it was for the best. It forced everything out into the open. He put his phone down and looked at me. For the first time in weeks, he really looked at me. And then he said the words that changed everything. "There was no friend," he said, his voice as calm as if he were telling me the weather. "I made him up." I just stared at him. It didn't register at first. "What? What are you talking about?" "The furious friend," he said, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "The one who was going to the board meeting." "There was no one." "That was me." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had to grip the counter to keep myself from falling. All the pieces started snapping into place, forming a picture so monstrous I couldn't bear to look at it. He hadn't just reacted in a moment of pain. He had seen my panicked emails about finding a therapist. He knew what I had done. And instead of confronting me, instead of yelling or screaming or demanding a divorce, he had waited. He had sat with that knowledge, and he had thought. He had planned. He knew what mattered to me most outside of our children. He knew my career was my identity, the one thing that was truly mine. And he built a weapon out of it. He invented a threat so specific, so catastrophic that he knew it would trigger the exact chain of events that followed. He knew Mark would try to protect me. He knew Mark would confess. And he knew that confession would cost me my promotion. He didn't just want to hurt me back. He wanted to dismantle me. He wanted to burn down the one part of my life that he had never been able to touch. The affair was my fault. I own that. What I did was a betrayal, and it was wrong. But his revenge, that was something else entirely. It was a cold, a hurt person lashes out. A cruel person lays a trap and patiently waits for you to walk into it. He hadn't just discovered the affair. He had orchestrated its fallout with the precision of a surgeon. He watched me sob in terror over a threat that only existed in his head. He watched my professional life go up in flames and didn't say a word. We are still living in the same house. For the kids. That's the excuse we use. But the quiet emptiness I felt before is gone. It's been replaced by something much worse, a thick, choking tension. I look at him now, and I don't see the man I married, the provider, the good father. I see a stranger. A man who is capable of sharpening a knife in silence and sliding it into my back, not out of rage, but out of a desire for perfect, quiet revenge. I broke our marriage, but he salted the earth. He didn't just want to end our relationship, he wanted to make sure I would have nothing left when it was over. He wanted to destroy the person I was without him, so I would be forced to remember that my biggest mistake wasn't just having an affair. It was underestimating the cold, patient fury of the man I had stopped seeing.